so much for being here. The last time the FTC commissioners were before this committee was for a single combined legislative and oversight hearing in July of 2021. Given that, there will be no shortage of questions today, I'm sure, from both sides. Sadly, we have no Republican commissioners on the panel to provide balanced views on what the FTC is doing in its current actions. That's regrettable. I'm sure you are not surprised, of course, that I would lead into that. But no FTC watcher can look at what has gone over the last 2 years at the Commission and conclude that things are on the right track. The stretching of authorities and resources has led some to question what authorities should be stripped or whether it should even exist. I'm not in that camp. I want this to be the most respected protector of our children, our seniors, and of course the ultimate enforcer of our privacy and data security. However, it has become clear that these things are on the wrong course, as again, the priorities are diverted down a path of progressive pursuits that has led to career employees leaving the institution. That's unacceptable. So let me be clear. It is time that you focus on the authority that Congress has provided you. You have a laundry list of distractions from this mission with the many new rulemakings and requests for information, 6B studies that have begun and never concluded, all while continuing to lose constantly in federal court. This is not what success looks like when you're tasked with protecting consumers from harms, especially at a time when your commission released findings showing consumers reportedly lost almost $9 billion to scams in 2022, a 30% increase from the previous year. That includes over $500 million in dollars lost in my state alone, the great state of Florida. Maybe instead of carrying out President Biden's leftist crusade unsuccessfully, you could instead prioritize resources we give you to help vulnerable Americans. Sadly, we have raised these concerns before. I have continually been troubled by the FTC's unwillingness to provide substantive answers to questions from this committee regarding its decision-making process on this and other matters. You attempt to block us out like you did to your former Republican commissioners, one of whom resigned in a showing of contempt of your management and lack of due process. At the same time, you have asked for a budget increase. How does one justify this when we hear how staff has been diverted from mission-critical functions and pulled from bureaus to focus on merger reviews? In fact, there has been such a mass exodus of career staff at the agency, you seem to be squandering away the resources that we currently give you in favor of pursuing unprecedented progressive legal theories. I'm submitting for the record an article from Bloomberg Law on March 16 titled, "FTC Lawyers Leave at Fastest Rate in Years as Con Sets New Tone." Without objection, so ordered. Perhaps nowhere more evident that there's a drain on the consumer protection mission is, of course, the lengths the FTC has gone to block Illumina's reacquisition of Grail. The FTC, in an unprecedented move, overturned an earlier decision by the agency's chief administrative law judge, which allowed the merger to move forward. This decision could literally delay new and life-saving screening technology from getting to cancer patients. I'm submitting for the record an editorial regarding that decision from the Wall Street Journal on April 3rd titled, "The FTC's Unholy Grail," Without objection, so ordered. In closing, I implore you to please get back to what you can do best, which is to support and protect consumers. That's the goal. That's the mission. To do that, you must work within the constraints that Congress has set, rather than abusing the authorities we have provided. I look forward to our conversation and any follow-up. Thank you. And now I recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, for 5 minutes for her opening statement, our ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to warmly welcome the Federal Trade Commission Chair, Lina M, and the commissioners, Slaughter and Bedoya, to be here. I think we're going to have a very different opinion of what the FTC has accomplished and the direction that it is going in. We know that two of the Republicans, you mentioned that there weren't any now, both retired before their terms expired. And we know that the Federal Trade Commission for 100 years have been protecting consumers, and that has not stopped now. The agency has accomplished a number of very important achievements. In the past 2 years, alone, the FTC protected consumers in a number of ways. One, returned over $670 million to defrauded consumers, and behind let me see, defrauded Americans, began four sectoral investigations, including into big tech, which we know needs to happen. And every dollar that that is returned, that the FTC was able to get, is returned in dividends for American consumers. In just one example, the FTC protected millions of app users by prohibiting the sharing of sensitive information. Last year, the FTC help me out. Last year, the FTC fined Epic Games $520 million for violating the children's privacy laws. We know that the agency returned more than $64 million to the patients of pharmacy benefit managers and health companies. So one after another, we're seeing how the FTC is putting money back into people's pockets. Consumer privacy rights has been a big issue, of course, for Americans, and the FTC has taken notice. Last year, the agency proposed rules to protect consumers' privacy and security. However, the FTC needs additional authorities and resources in order to provide the consumers what they actually need. We know that, Mr. Chairman, you and I were able to pass the Informed Consumer Act, which absolutely was helpful in giving the FTC a tool to ensure that trustworthy online marketplaces are thriving. And I plan to reintroduce legislation, legislation, the Online Consumer Protection Act, which will give the FTC tools to hold tech companies and platforms accountable. And I'm also going to introduce the FTC Whistleblower Act, which will protect whistleblowers. And finally, the 21st Century FTC Act, introduced by Representative Castor, and my FTC Autonomy Act will give the FTC will give the Commission rulemaking and civil penalty authorities. So let me just end with this, having reached my time. I just want to say that big tech has been fighting back against efforts to rein them in, and one of the ways that they've been doing it is to target with the chairwoman herself, which I resent deeply. Chair Khan and the FTC is standing for working families, for small businesses, and is holding the corporate wrongdoers accountable. This is exactly what we need, and I appreciate the work of the current Federal Trade Commission. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Thank you. I now recognize the chair of the full committee, Mrs. Rogers, for her 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to start by welcoming the commissioners. As you all know, the FTC has historically been a very bipartisan agency for solutions around consumer protection, data privacy, and antitrust law. Unfortunately, this tradition is currently under attack. Chair Khan, under your tenure as chair, the integrity and effectiveness of this independent agency has been repeatedly questioned. You've suffered many losses in court at all federal levels of the judiciary branch. You've drastically reduced transparency and accountability by cutting out key voices at the agency. Both Republican commissioners have resigned during your tenure. Senior staff have quit in record numbers, with reports in the New York Post describing you as abusive and a tyrant. There's been a 34% decline in employee confidence in senior leadership's respect for them and motivation at work. Former Commissioner Christine Wilson cited your disregard for the law, for the rule of law, as one of the reasons for her resignation. Time and time again, you prioritized a personal and political agenda over the integrity of the FTC in the interests of Americans. Despite numerous letters of concern from this committee, you've continued to ignore these in a dangerous and misguided consolidation of power. When you appeared before us in July of 2021, I asked about your decision to remove, quote, without unduly burdening legitimate business activity, end of quote, from the FTC mission statement. It was a long-standing bipartisan tradition at the FTC to include this in the mission to protect Americans and businesses. Eliminating this guardrail, which prevents government overreach, was even more startling given the timing. People across the country were working to reopen their businesses after the COVID-19 lockdown. This meant bringing their employees back to work so that they could make a living and provide for their families. Instead, they faced intimidation from the federal government. This was not a one-off situation. The FTC is still sending hundreds of penalty notice letters to businesses, even when they've done nothing wrong. This violation of due process will not be tolerated. Regarding the FTC's budget request, the concerns raised by current and former employees at your agency do not reassure us that you'll put the American people first. Leadership matters. Before I even entertain any additional funds or authority for the FTC, first you need to convince us that the mission of protecting Americans isn't taking a back seat to the Biden administration's radical agenda. We want you to be the preeminent data protection agency in the world, and that must be your focus at the direction of Congress and giving these abuses of power. What is clearly needed before Congress considers any new authorities or funding are reforms more guardrails, and increased transparency to ensure that you are accountable to the American people. This includes for how the FTC will protect the privacy and data security of the American people. The single best way we can protect Americans in today's digital ecosystem is a national standard. In August last year, this committee voted overwhelmingly to advance the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. Shortly after, your commission voted on partisan lines to act unilaterally on your own rules. I want to be clear. Our goal continues to be for Congress to enact a national standard with the expectation the FTC, with guardrails, will play a critical role in this effort. Establishing a national data privacy and data security standard is bigger and more important than any one person or any single agency to act unilaterally and risk losing people's trust. More than 80% of Americans say they're looking for Congress to act. It is a top priority for their own privacy, for their kids' privacy, and to rein in big tech. We, the people's representatives, take this responsibility seriously because we're accountable to them. We're accountable to the people, and we have no intention of losing sight of that. I want to thank former Commissioners Phillips and Wilson for their service to the country and the American people. I'm saddened that they're no longer at the commission. Chair Khan, Commissioners Slaughter and Bedoya, thank you for being with us here today. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back.
The lady yields back, and now I recognize the ranking member of the full committee for his 5 minutes opening statement, the gentleman from New Jersey. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start by expressing my support for Chair Khan. I don't agree with Chair Rogers' criticism of her. The problem is that the GOP doesn't like the FTC enforcement role. They would simply gut the FTC at the expense of consumers. The Federal Trade Commission has one of the broadest purviews of any federal agency, fighting deception and unfair business practices and anti-competitive conduct across the entire economy. Managing this portfolio with less than 1,400 employees is no small feat, and in order to ensure the FTC can continue its important work, Congress must approve its requested budget to further support much-needed staffing. It's clear the Republicans don't like what the FTC does. They don't seek to protect consumers. Whenever the Republicans are in charge in Congress or at the administration level, they seek to cut the legs of the FTC. And that's unfortunate because the FTC brings enforcement actions to prevent companies from misusing consumers' personal information, failing to properly protect consumer data, and profiting from deceptive advertising and other telemarketing schemes. This important work comes at a time when the FTC is facing coordinated attacks from big tech aimed at evading the FTC's challenges to its business model. For years, big tech has been putting profits ahead of consumer privacy and the opportunity to maximize advertising revenue ahead of our children's safety and well-being. The FTC is also committed to protecting seniors, veterans, communities of color, and non-English speakers who have all historically been targets for fraudsters and deceptive businesses. The FTC also protects consumers during some of the most important times of their lives, often when they are at their most vulnerable. The funeral rule protects grieving family members from predatory pricing. The mortgage assistance relief rule protects consumers who are seeking services to avoid foreclosure. And the used car rule requires that used car dealers display essential information on the window of every car they're selling. The FTC does all this with fewer employees than it had 45 years ago when the American economy was smaller and simpler. Back then, a deceptive advertising case often focused on a single print or TV ad. Today, the FTC needs even more resources in a complex economy where targeted advertising presents consumers with different ads and prices based on our personal characteristics. In addition to making sure the FTC is properly staffed, we should restore the FTC's full legal authority. Last Congress, this subcommittee led legislation that passed the House to restore the FTC's authority to go to court to seek to have money returned to consumers. Unfortunately, that legislation never passed the Senate. We must also resume our historic work on bipartisan comprehensive privacy legislation, as Chair Rogers mentioned, which could help the FTC give consumers substantive data privacy protections beyond the current notice and consent regime. And finally, given the frequency of big tech's repeat violations, we should also consider providing the FTC with additional tools to fight repeat corporate offenders. Just months after Twitter's second settlement with the FTC for privacy violations, media reporting suggested that Twitter may be violating that settlement by having engineers rather than high-level officers certify compliance and privacy controls. And Twitter isn't the only big tech repeat offender. In 2019, the FTC obtained a $5 billion civil penalty from Facebook for violating a 2012 consent order governing Facebook's privacy practices. The FTC has also brought 5 consumer protection enforcement actions against Google since 2011. Now, based on big tech's past performance, we should not do anything to undermine the FTC's enforcement against big tech. I'm concerned by false claims that the FTC's Twitter compliance investigation is partisan. In truth, it would be a dereliction of duty if the FTC did not thoroughly investigate Twitter's compliance. I also urge skepticism about coordinated partisan calls for Chair Khan's recusal based on her prior academic views. We shouldn't forget that this was well known by the 69 senators, including 20 Republicans, who voted to confirm her and lauded her for being tough on social media platforms and other big tech companies. Unsurprisingly, within weeks of Chair Khan's confirmation, Amazon and Facebook campaigned to undermine her enforcement efforts, in part by calling for her recusal. In October, a federal judge rejected such a motion, and independently of Chair Khan, the commission did the same in February. So I look forward to hearing from the chair and the commissioners today. But before yielding, I want to recognize that Commissioner Slaughter has joined us wearing a mask because she was ill earlier this week. The Republicans pushed a rule that prevents witnesses from appearing remotely. Rather than taking advantage of the technological tools that allows us to engage as Americans wherever they are, this rule requires her to choose between appearing in person or not appearing at all. I think this rule should be reconsidered because it limits participation by witnesses. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. So we'll get started with the witnesses now for their testimony. Our first witness is the Honorable Lina M, Chairman of the FTC. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Bilirakis, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify. It's an honor to be here with you alongside my colleagues, Commissioners Slaughter and Bedoya. I'd like to take a few minutes to share some of the Commission's accomplishments during this last year. None of this work would have been possible without the extraordinary efforts of the FTC staff who day after day fight for the American people, even when it means taking on some of the most powerful corporations in our economy. Although this oral testimony is mine alone, I know I speak for all of us when I say how lucky we are to work with the talented, dedicated professionals of the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC is firing on all cylinders to fully execute on our mandate to promote fair competition and protect Americans from unfair or deceptive practices. We are redoubling our efforts in traditional areas of enforcement, like protecting Americans' privacy and combating fraud, while also activating additional authorities that Congress has given us. In the last year alone, we've broken ground by bringing actions in a number of areas, including our first action under the Opioid Addiction Recovery Fraud Prevention Act, our first action under the Health Breach Notification Rule, our first action under the Military Lending Act, and our first action under the Made in USA Rule. In the meantime, we've also been racking up record monetary judgments, including the largest ever judgment to protect kids' privacy, the largest monetary judgment in a fair lending case, and the largest administrative judgment ever. Privacy and data security remain a major focus for the FTC, and I applaud this committee's continued efforts to enact comprehensive federal privacy legislation. For our part, Commission staff have brought critical actions to protect Americans' data, including kids' data and sensitive information like health data. We brought an action against Fortnite, the maker of Epic Games, for undermining children's privacy. We secured a record-breaking fine for the company's violation of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, while also securing important changes in the company's privacy practices. We also published a policy statement to put market participants on notice that we will vigorously protect children's privacy in the educational technology world, and we have followed up through our enforcement work, including through a recent action against Chegg, an ed tech company. The Commission also recently brought 2 seminal health privacy actions against BetterHelp and GoodRx, 2 online healthcare providers that we found had committed to keeping user-sensitive health information private, but ended up making it available for firms to use for advertising. In the settlements resolving these actions, staff negotiated outright bans prohibiting these companies from disclosing health data to third parties for advertising. Finally, Commission staff are currently litigating a privacy case against Kochava, a location data broker that was selling users sensitive location data, including information that could be used to identify whether people were going to addiction facilities, visiting reproductive health clinics, or going to religious services. Another major effort at the Commission this year has been stopping the scourge of junk fees, or the unwanted charges that can drain Americans' pocketbooks. The FTC brought enforcement actions against companies that trick consumers into spending money that they didn't intend or want to spend, including through manipulative online interfaces. We also sued car dealers for sneaking on junk fees for made-up or unwanted services. And we brought enforcement actions against companies that have trapped consumers into renewing payment plans through making cancellation intentionally difficult. Our $100 million settlement with internet phone provider Vonage, which we claimed was creating obstacles for consumers and small businesses trying to cancel their services, is a key example of this work. Beyond these enforcement actions, the Commission has also begun several rulemaking proceedings to address this conduct more systematically. This is included through seeking comment on a proposed junk fees rulemaking and proposing our click-to-cancel rule, which would require that companies make it as easy to cancel a subscription as they do to sign up for one. The FTC has also been working to preserve the integrity of the Made in USA label by halting companies from making false Made in USA claims. In 2021, the Commission finalized a rule that prohibits the misuse of the Made in America label, triggering stiff civil penalties, injunctive relief, and other remedies for those who violate it. The Commission is already taking action to enforce this rule, and these actions help protect honest businesses and true domestic manufacturers while ensuring that consumers can trust the Made in USA label. Consumers and independent businesses have also benefited from the Commission staff working to defend Americans' right to repair. The FTC has targeted unlawful repair restrictions, which can make consumer products more difficult to fix and can close off the market to independent repair shops. Since issuing our 2021 policy statement committing the agency to this work, we've brought 3 major actions against companies for imposing unlawful repair restrictions and have required them to eliminate restrictive warranty terms. Our fraud enforcement efforts also remain a critical part of our work. Over the last year, we've been particularly focused on fraud that harms veterans, service members, and older Americans. For example, our first action under the Military Lending Act, which we brought together with 18 states, required a national retailer to pay over $10 million in refunds for cheating military families with illegal financing and sale tactics. We've also been very active in preventing and remediating fraud against elder Americans, and this remains a core part of our work. Many of these successes reflect years of work by Commission staff, and I'm honored to call them colleagues. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank the chair. Our next witness is the Honorable Rebecca Slaughter, Commissioner of the FTC, and we appreciate you appearing today, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis, Ranking Member Schakowsky, Chair McMorris-Rogers, and Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee. I'm grateful for your invitation to testify today about the vital work of the Federal Trade Commission. As you know, I'm somewhat under the weather, but I'm committed to being here if I could because of the value I place on the oversight work of this committee. The 2 themes I will emphasize today are resources and authorities. Our talented staff have extremely full plates, policing everything from dark patterns and data abuses in novel digital markets to old-school deceptive advertising and hardcore fraud across nearly the entire economy. I meet regularly with our staff, and the top concern I hear from them is that we lack adequate resources to do the job. This has been true in each and every year of my service, especially as we take on the biggest and richest firms on behalf of the American people. One salient data point, we had 50% more employees at the beginning of the Reagan administration than we do today. But today I have a new message about FTC resources. Thank you. Thank you, Congress, for investing in the Commission's work, enabling us to retain expert staff, conduct complex investigations, deepen our market expertise, and even have a more fair shot in litigation against some of the wealthiest companies in the world. The appropriation authorized at the end of last year gave this commission a significant budget increase for which we are deeply grateful. This wise investment is a crucial down payment on empowering the FTC to police modern markets, but yes, more is needed. Just consider that our Division of Privacy and Identity Protection has around 50 staff, whereas, for example, the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK boasts a staff of nearly 1,000. That's about 20 times as many staff in a nation with about a fifth of our population. So thank you, and please continue to invest in the FTC. Americans deserve no less. In addition to more resources, more robust authorities are necessary for the FTC to effectively protect American consumers. I will touch on two that are well known to this subcommittee. The first is the opportunity before you to pass a comprehensive national privacy law. Thank you for your hard work on this project, which included passing a bill out of the full committee on a bipartisan basis during the last Congress. I continue to believe that the passage of such a bill represents the best possible path for protecting Americans from data abuses. As you know, last year we launched an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on commercial surveillance and lax data security under Section 18 of the FTC Act. The record we develop in that process may allow us to promulgate rules to address prevalent practices that violate the FTC Act. This is more than we've been able to do through one-off enforcement actions, but substantially less than Congress could do with a new bill. I heartily recommend to you and your staff the large comment record our rulemaking has already developed as an important historic corpus in the privacy field. And I know that as our work continues, we stand ready and willing to support your efforts to enact a comprehensive national privacy law. Even as we look forward to the day when Americans are better protected from the novel harms of the 21st century's data-driven economy, we must not lose sight of the urgent need to restore one of the 20th century's best tools for protecting consumers, Section 13B of the FTC Act. As you know, for more than 40 years, under bipartisan administrations and with the blessings of 8 circuit courts, the FTC brought actions in federal court to return money to consumers from whom it was unlawfully taken. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, the Supreme Court decided in AMG Capital Management that Section 13B does not authorize equitable monetary relief. I am grateful to this subcommittee for your urgent work to fix Section 13B to make explicit that courts can order law violators to return the money they wrongfully took. While Congress continues to work on this issue, the Commission is using every available tool to deliver justice to harmed consumers. We are partnering wherever possible with state enforcers who have redress authority. We are exploring new rulemakings which can enable consumer redress. And we are bringing actions under Section 19, which allows limited redress. I applaud these heroic efforts of our aggressive and creative staff and terrific enforcement partners, but make no mistake, it is not enough. We need a Section 13B fix. So I implore you to keep at it. Your constituents deserve to be made whole when they get ripped off. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank the Commissioner, and now our final witness is the Honorable Alvaro Bedoya, again, a Commissioner of the FTC. You're recognized, sir, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Schakowsky, Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Pallone, members of the subcommittee, good morning. I'm really grateful for the chance to appear before you, particularly alongside my colleagues, Chair Kahn and Commissioner Slaughter. I want to echo, first of all, their gratitude to you for your support of our mission. And I want to echo their gratitude for our staff. All that work you're going to hear about today, that's staff work, career staff, nonpartisan staff, working overtime despite some pretty substantial ongoing resource constraints to protect the American public. I'd love to focus on one priority that is front of mind for parents across the country, and that's the teen mental health crisis, and specifically the role of social media in that crisis. This is a bipartisan priority for members of the subcommittee and the full committee. You are leading many of the key efforts to address it, and so I want to tell you about the work we're doing at the Commission on that front. The first thing we're doing is digging deep into the research. Just this last week, staff and I met with leaders at the National Institutes of Health to discuss that research, the existing findings. We've also met with the top psychologists in the field to learn from them. We've met with leaders at the American Psychological Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, and here is what I've learned. there is evidence that some uses of social media do, in fact, hurt certain groups of children and teenagers. Now, yes, there's important nuances, and more targeted research is necessary, but this is not some moral panic. There is a there there. The second thing we're doing is building our expert capacity on this issue. One of the many reasons I was proud to support the bipartisan comprehensive privacy bill put forward by your committee, Mr. Chairman, was because it called on the Commission to create a division focused on youth, privacy, and marketing, and also directed the Commission to hire psychologists to study precisely this issue. And I want to get that done now. And so I'm pleased to share that it is now part of the Commission's strategic plan to explore hiring psychologists on staff, and we're actively working on doing that. I've also started conversations with regulators in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands and elsewhere to understand how they are enforcing their own laws in the area and how they use psychologists in their own work. Third, we are bringing cases against companies we allege are exacerbating this crisis. Research has shown that one of the drivers of the teen mental health crisis online is the harassment and verbal abuse they experience online. Chair Khan mentioned the Commission's landmark case against the makers of Fortnite. And in that case, we allege that Fortnite preset its privacy settings in a way that allowed adults to harass kids and teens. And our action shut that down and sent a message, a clear message, in my view, to all companies that that is not okay. If the members of the committee and subcommittee are able to pass a comprehensive privacy bill, which includes additional protections for kids and teens, that will strengthen our hand, and we will use every bit of that authority. In the meantime, I'll just say that I personally believe that we do have substantial authority to sue companies who are designing their products in a way that harms kids and teens' mental health. Until that day, I want to say unequivocally to any company that makes money by tracking where people go to the doctor, where they go for counseling, the medicine they take, or for that matter, where they worship, or where they go for addiction treatment, the Commission is watching and has brought several recent actions against companies that we allege broke the law by making money off of this sensitive data. That's most of what I wanted to share. I'll end on another note. I was just sharing with some of the members of the subcommittee before we started that we spend a lot of time with our family in Louisiana. And so one thing I've tried to do as a commissioner is prioritize getting out of the Beltway and to visit small business leaders in rural America. In the last year, I met with grocers in South Dakota and Utah, pharmacists in West Virginia, corn growers and cattlemen in Iowa. I am personally profoundly worried about what's happening to grocery, pharmacy, and agriculture in small-town America, and I'm trying to do everything I can to understand and to help. That's why I was proud to support our study into pharmacy benefit managers, our recent action against pesticides manufacturers, and our recent right to repair cases. And that's why I feel strongly that we should reinitiate enforcement of laws intended to provide a level playing field for small-town retailers. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm looking forward to your questions and on these or any other subjects. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks so much. Now I'll begin the questioning and recognize myself for 5 minutes. Chair Khan, we have been troubled by the redirection of FTC resources away from consumer protection, such as such as a focus on fraud and scams, to competition rulemakings, merger reviews, and suits that do not appear to be very successful. The statistics back this up, as FTC data shows U.S. consumers have suffered billions of dollars in losses due to fraud. By your own numbers, Madam Chair, a staggering $8.8 billion in losses last year, which is 30%. It's a 30% increase over the previous year. The resources for your policy agenda are eating up valuable career staff time and energy that could otherwise be used on protecting consumers. The question is, why are you wasting away the resources we give you with new rulemakings, and will you instead commit to work with your colleagues, and hopefully your future Republican colleagues, to move away from your current direction of progressive legal theories and focus back on the fraud program at the FTC and bring down this sad statistic? So that's the first question, please.
Chairman, addressing and taking on fraud remains a core part of the FTC's work. Since I joined the Commission, we've brought over 60 law enforcement actions targeting scams and frauds across the economy, be it pyramid schemes, healthcare fraud, Made in USA fraud. This remains a core part of our work. As you know, given the setback that we received in the Supreme Court, it is much more difficult for us to return money back to consumers when they have been defrauded. Our staff has been working heroically to activate other authorities to make sure that we have hooks to get money back in people's pockets, but there's no doubt that that was a big setback in the courts. But we continue to focus on our frauds, addressing frauds and combating frauds, and this is going to continue to be part of our work. One change that we've also pursued.
Well, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and move on, because you mentioned the 13B issue. We both believe there should be a fix to ensure that defrauded consumers should get money returned to them. Obviously, we both agree on that, and you had mentioned the Supreme Court case. After all, I led the only bipartisan effort in the committee process last Congress to provide FTC with the authority under 13B to seek monetary relief. I know you remember that. This effort, though, was ultimately rejected by the majority at the time, and the Rules Committee, surely at the behest of Speaker Pelosi. Based on how the agency has abused other existing statutory authorities, there's no doubt we must provide crystal clear guidelines on how the FTC pursues monetary relief in its consumer protection cases. That kind of clarity will go a long way in furthering the 13B dialogue. So the question is, will you commit to pursuing a sensible policy here that works in unison with standards of your other statutes and the history of cases previously chairs have pursued? Yes or no, please?
I would be thrilled to work with Congress to get a fix to 13B, and I know our staffs have been working with your teams.
Okay. Will you commit to working with the Bureau of Economics to issue a monetary policy statement to shed more light on how the FTC calculates monetary relief and civil penalties in consumer protection matters? Yes or no, please?
There's a set of legal considerations that we take
Can you
into
please
account.
answer yes or no?
We're happy to provide more information about how we go about making those calculations. This is anchored in law. We have to follow the law when we're making these calculations.
Well, I want to work with you on this, but we've got to get it done. Will you commit to ensuring procedural due process with this policy and with all other enforcement actions your agency takes? Yes or no, please?
Of course, due process is critical, and the FTC vigorously
All right, let me
follows due
go ahead and
process.
ask you one more question since I have the time. Chair Khan, last year, the Office of Inspector General conducted an audit of the FTC's unpaid consultant and expert program. Unfortunately, and I know you're aware of this, and the entire commission is, unfortunately, it found that there were limited controls in place to mitigate the risks involved in the program, and that these unpaid academics were doing essential government functions, which should only be reserved for federal employees under law. I think you know that too. OIG put 3 significant recommendations in its report, all of which are still considered open. Why is that? And what are you doing to address the independent watchdog's concerns? Have you addressed this? Are you in the process of addressing this? Please, because we need an answer.
Yes, Congressman, we've addressed all of the process improvements that the IG had identified. As you know, we followed longstanding government authorities to bring on outside experts to pursue critical work, including work relating to AI, work relating to children's privacy. These experts are a critical part of being able to make sure we have the technical expertise in key areas.
Well, I would like for you to, I'd like additional questioning with regard to that because, again, as you know, not being federal employees, they don't really have the right to do, I think they're overreaching. So we do need to address this issue even more, and I understand it's considered open. So let me go ahead and conclude. I'll yield back, and I'll recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Schakowsky, for her 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask Chair Khan this question. the issue of privacy, comprehensive privacy legislation has come up, and you do have have engaged in some rulemaking on that. What I wanted to ask you, why do you think it's important, despite the role of the FTC, for us to have comprehensive privacy legislation, and how would it fit with what the FTC does to protect consumer privacy?
There's no question that Congress passing strong, comprehensive federal privacy legislation is the best option here. We, through our work, see day after day that the costs of privacy violations are real, they're serious. They lead to stalking, stigmatization, people's sensitive information being exposed, huge hacks. And so action in this area is critical. Of course, what that legislation ended up looking like, the details would matter in terms of our subsequent work, but we stand ready to enforce any privacy law that Congress passes, and we'd be happy to continue working with you all on that.
Thank you. Commissioner Slaughter, you were talking about 13B, and you heard from the chair that we are very concerned about the fact that now consumers can't be made whole in any way. Do you have any estimate of how much money would actually be returned to consumers? I don't know, with any particular period that you could cite, if 13B did not prevent that from happening?
Thank you. I can give you one data point, which is that in the 10 years prior to AMG, the Commission returned about $10 billion to consumers in redress. It's very difficult to calculate what we are missing now, in part because of our creative efforts to fill the gap, and in part because in addition to making it harder to get money back to consumers, the lack of 13B authority actually makes it harder for us to get companies to enter into settlement, because there isn't a monetary cost to them for violating the law if they're only subject to injunctive relief. So it's hard to make a prospective number, but the data from the past indicates that we were able to return many, many, many times the agency's annual budget to consumers every year.
$10 billion that now fraudsters, that there's no help for consumers. This is really, I think, an urgent situation. I also wanted to ask about FTC whistleblowers. Any one of you could answer. I am interested in passing legislation that would protect whistleblowers. I don't know if
I'm happy to.
Bedoya would want to, or Chairman Khan.
I'll just say briefly, whistleblowers play an incredibly important function, shedding light on wrongdoing, oftentimes at great personal expense. And so giving the FTC the ability to grant protections to whistleblowers would be really important.
Also, Chair Khan, can you describe some of the recent FTC privacy cases and protections that you've been involved in?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So one of the key areas of focus for us has been protecting Americans' privacy when it comes to sensitive information. That can include sensitive health information. It can include sensitive geolocation information. One of the companies that we sued last year was Coachava, a data broker that was allowing others to buy information that identified in granular detail where people were going, whether Americans were going to addiction facilities, whether they were going to church. And this was information that was pretty easily available for sale. So we took a law enforcement action. We're still litigating that case, basically alleging that that was an unfair practice. We've also recently brought actions against two healthcare companies, GoodRx and BetterHelp. These were companies that collected sensitive health information from consumers on the pretext of using it for providing health-related services, but then ended up turning around and actually making it available for advertising, and effectively making it easy to monetize that sensitive information. So that was another area where we've been bringing actions, and we remain devoted to fully protecting Americans' privacy.
Thank you so much, and my time is up. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. And now I'll recognize the chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. Rogers, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Chair Khan. As you know, Ranking Member Pallone and I have been working on privacy data security legislation. Last year, I expressed to you my concerns on your so-called commercial surveillance rulemaking on data privacy. It was announced just weeks after this committee had passed the bill 53-2. I wanted to ask, once we've enacted our legislation, it is a top priority for this Congress. Do we have your commitment that you will suspend this proceeding and focus FTC's resources on implementing the law as enacted, as well as stick to the narrow contours of the rulemaking authority that we prescribe? Yes or no?
Congresswoman, absolutely. We stand ready to enforce any privacy legislation that Congress passes.
Thank you. Commissioner Slaughter and Bedoya, do you agree? Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Chair Khan, I'd like to pivot to ethics, which are essential to maintaining public trust in government officials like yourself. Do you recall the Senate questionnaire you filled out for the position you're in now? Yes or no?
Yes.
Within that document, you recall a referendum or a reference to a commitment on seeking advice from the FTC's, quote, designated agency ethics official known as DAO. Yes or no?
Yes.
Do you recall the nature of what that commitment would be?
Sorry,
Do
could
you
you
recall the nature of what that commitment would be?
consulting with the ethics official? Yes.
Can you confirm that it relates to conflicts of interest?
Yes.
Are there any instances where you've not followed DAO's advice? Yes or no, and could you list any?
No, in instances where companies like Facebook or Amazon have petitioned for my recusal, I have consulted with the DAO and have taken actions that are consistent with the legal statements that the DAO has made.
Thank you, Commissioner Slaughter, and I'd like to you to respond each to these questions as well, Commissioner Bedoya. Would you have concerns with an FTC commissioner not following the recommendations of DAO, yes or no?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think our job in all instances is to consult with our expert staff, including the DAO, study the underlying law, the underlying ethics rules, and come to our own conclusions.
Would you have concerns? I guess going back to my question, would you have concerns with an FTC commissioner not following the recommendations of DAO?
I would have huge concerns with an FTC commissioner not following the requirements of the law
Okay.
and the requirements of the ethics
Thank
rules.
you. I'm just going to
I would-
reclaim my time because I got a lot to get through here. Bedoya, Commissioner Bedoya.
Thank you, Chair Rogers. As Commissioner Slaughter said, I'd have concerns if someone didn't consult with ethics officials, and it's my understanding and belief that Chair Khan has in fact complied
Okay.
with her ethics obligations.
Thank you. Again, to both of the other commissioners, when voting for a redaction on a recommendation for a recusal issue, are you aware that Congress can ask for that unredacted version, yes or no?
Yes.
Bedoya, okay?
Yes.
Okay. You were both senior congressional staffers, and I appreciate your work on the Hill. How would have you advised your boss to respond to reports that a senior political appointee was ignoring ethics guidance from an ethics official of an agency she or he led? Commissioner Slaughter?
Well, I think the oversight work of this committee and all congressional committees is really vital to ensuring that agencies are acting properly. So anytime Congress hears of a concern, I think it's appropriate for Congress to look into it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bedoya?
Same, Chair Rogers. I would urge them to ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Chair Khan, you've told me how, quote, congressional oversight is incredibly important, so we certainly agree on that. And in your Senate confirmation questionnaire, you include your own congressional oversight experience. On page 18 of that questionnaire, you said that you would, quote, ensure that your department complies with deadlines for information set by congressional committees, and that your department endeavors to timely comply with requests for information from individual members of Congress. Do you feel like you've upheld this commitment to Congress? Yes or no?
Yes, I do.
I and members of this committee and other committees have asked you on multiple occasions for detailed answers to our questions. Yes or no, do you believe that you've sufficiently answered these requests?
Yes, I know these conversations are ongoing, but we have been engaging in good faith and already provided significant information.
That seems inconsistent with the letters that you've sent back to us. For instance, in a letter that this committee sent to you on December 8th, 2021, the committee asked you why you proposed deleting without unduly burdening legitimate business activity from the FTC's mission statement, the guardrail that has existed under both Republican and Democrat administrations. When the committee asked about the consultation you had with other commissioners to reach this consensus, you responded with, quote, "The agency is currently considering the comments received on the draft strategic plan, including some comments that raise questions about the elimination." You go on to say, quote, "The commission will consider these comments carefully when it votes on the strategic plan." You know, it seems to me that you've already made up your mind, irrespective of the concerns that are shared. And this is just one example of vague or misleading answers that do not tell the whole story. And I just urge you to be responsive to the people's house, this committee in particular. We are the representatives of the people. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chairwoman yields back. Now I'll recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis. Last Congress, our subcommittee made historic progress on a comprehensive data privacy bill, and that legislation focused on data minimization rather than notice and consent as the best way to protect consumers' privacy, and it passed out of our committee on a 53-2 bipartisan basis. The FTC's written testimony acknowledges that the traditional notice and consent framework for protecting consumer privacy is insufficient. So let me ask Chair Khan, do you agree that data minimization is an important bedrock principle for ensuring consumers have meaningful privacy protections in the modern online economy?
Absolutely. I think time and time again, we've seen how minimizing the data the companies are collecting on the front end is critical to ensuring that consumers' privacy is protected, and also has huge benefits for data security, because if there's less data that you're collecting on the front end, that means there's less opportunity for major hacks that would expose significant data.
Thank you. Now, I understand that in the absence of a comprehensive federal privacy statute, the FTC has historically protected consumer data privacy using the FTC's general authority to enforce against unfair and deceptive business practices. But my question is, can you discuss what challenges the FTC faces using that unfair and deceptive practices authority to protect consumer privacy?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say, any instance in which Congress is providing greater specification, including through bright line rules and clear restrictions, that's always the best course. For us, we have been using our Unfair and Deceptive Acts or Practices Authority for some time with great success. Of course, in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision to say we can no longer get monetary equitable relief through Section 13B of the FTC Act, it means that our opportunities for remedies are quite limited. And so that would be one area where I think we see significant shortfalls.
Thank you. Now, let me say that I appreciate the breadth and importance of the FTC's consumer protection work. And in your written testimony, you estimate that for fiscal year 2022, every dollar of the FTC's cost returned an estimated $30 in FTC-provided benefits to consumers. So let me ask you that question. Can you please elaborate on your return on investment analysis, and what sorts of benefits do consumers receive from the FTC's consumer protection work?
Yeah, absolutely. We really are a small agency, but we punch above our weight. I think those numbers really speak for themselves. And despite getting the setback that we did, our staff have been able to activate other authorities to make sure that if companies are, for example, scamming the American people or trapping them into unwanted subscriptions or engaging in made-in-USA fraud, these are all the types of instances in which we can actually get money back in people's pockets. And so these are all important areas of our work.
Okay. Now, how will the increase in funding and staff that you're requesting help expand the Commission's consumer protection work?
So this is something we've been thinking about quite significantly, especially in light of the additional funds that we were very grateful to receive this time around. There are a few areas that we're really focused on. One is making sure that we have in-house the expertise needed to fully understand how these technologies are working, fully grasping really the inners of how these tools are functioning. And to that end, we were really thrilled to be able to launch an Office of Technology earlier this year. We've already doubled the number of technologists that we've had in-house. As my colleague mentioned, Commissioner Bedoya, we're also thinking about other types of expertise that we need to be bringing on board alongside our terrific lawyers and our terrific economists, and of course, growing their ranks, as my fellow Commissioner, Commissioner Slaughter noted, including in the context of our privacy and security work. That would be a key priority for us in this area as well.
Oh, thank you. I'm just going to go back, because I have another minute, if either of the other commissioners could discuss my previous question about challenges the FTC faces using unfair and deceptive practices authority to protect consumer privacy. You probably only have time for one of you to answer. Who wants to answer?
I'm happy to answer. So as you know, the FTC Act lays out a prohibition on unfair and deceptive acts and practices and says that for an act to be unfair, it must cause substantial injury that's not reasonably avoidable and not offset by countervailing benefits. That's an important test, and it's one that allows us to reach some problematic data practices, but not all of them. And we cannot, by rule, I think it's really important to remember this, we cannot, by rulemaking, address practices that are not prohibited under the FTC Act. So we can't do a rule that would target something that we can't target through an independent enforcement action. What you, this committee, did with your privacy bill last Congress was attack a much broader swath of problematic practices than we might likely be able to reach under the FTC Act's prohibitions, and that's really important. So we have seen our rulemaking effort as an important way to do more than we could do before and provide clarity to markets, and especially to small businesses and honest businesses who want to know what the law prohibits, but it is not nearly what you can achieve in terms of passing a law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. The gentleman yields back. Now I'll recognize Dr. Bouchon for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis, for calling today's hearing. When this committee last spoke with the Federal Trade Commissioners 2 years ago, I asked Commissioner Chopra about rebate walls and other practices that stunt innovation and competition. Maybe perhaps I should have asked about the FTC's policies on zombie votes by a departed commissioner, gag orders on staff, or sidelining of the minority commissioners, since we don't have any. For all of the statements being made and the rulemaking in the name of ensuring competition, it seems like the FTC within its own ranks have prioritized sidelining ideological competition to the progressive views of the current commissioners. I also want to say this, that fraud against seniors is out of control in this country. I know this. My father passed away. About 6 months later, I recognized my mother could not manage her finances, and it took me 2 years to unravel it. And the amount of fraud that she had committed against her financially and otherwise was unbelievable. It's out of control, and whatever we can do about it is important. The FTC obviously has done a lot of positive things, but let me focus on some of the concerns that I have, okay? Chair Khan, last September, I co-signed a letter for you expressing support for the renewal of the FTC's franchise rule in its current form. As franchises create a pathway to entrepreneurship for my constituents, especially among women and people of color. On March 10th, the FTC put out a request for information on the business practices of franchises in relation to the rule amidst growing concern around unfair and deceptive practices in the franchise industry. First, I'll note the franchising is a business model, not an industry. More importantly, what are the specific unfair and deceptive franchising practices this refers to?
Thanks, Congressman. So we have been hearing for over a year now from franchises about a set of practices that are quite troubling. Month after month, franchises come to our open commission meetings where they can speak directly to the commissioners and raise issues of concerns. And so we thought it was important not just to be collecting this information anecdotally, but to actually do a systematic look at what's really going on here. What is the relationship between the franchisees and the franchisors? Are there types of practices that we should be taking a closer look at? Are there practices that may be unlawful? And so that's why we issued the RFI. We've already started getting some submissions and really look forward to taking a close look at whatever comes in.
Okay, do you plan on pursuing a rule governing the franchise relationship with this RFI as a basis?
So as you know, we already have the franchise rule in place, which
Right.
governs the disclosures that
Well,
franchisors
you want to
have to make.
change it, so I understand.
we
So
have a
you're going to use the RFI to justify changing that, right?
No, these are separate procedures, and one reason why we launched the RFI is because there were issues we were hearing about that are not governed by the franchise rule. So it was really in order to make sure that if we need to do subsequent enforcement activity separate from what's covered by the franchise rule, that we have the information we need.
Okay. And I think, I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, I mean, obviously I have a certain viewpoint, but I mean, this is about organized labor wanting to organize all the employees at franchisees across the country. We all know that. I mean, it's about, yeah, there might be some problems, but what it's about is taking a large organization that has non-corporate restaurants that are franchised restaurants, and the Democrat Party and the organized labor are unhappy that they can't organize all these people, say at Company X, because one place may have 40 employees, 50 employees, and put it under one corporate, force it under one corporate head, so they have 25,000 employees that can be organized by organized labor. I mean, I bet this has been an issue for years and years and years. And if that's the goal, you know, then using a federal agency to assist organized labor in this effort is wrong.
Congressman, respectfully, this is about small business owners. The types of people that we are hearing from are hotel owners, owners of fast food franchises. This is really about the potentially abusive practices that they've been suffering. It really is not connected to some of the issues.
Well, the ones I talked to, they're concerned that they want to have 3 or 4 different worker unions within their local McDonald's. And look, I've said for years and years publicly that if we want to spend $25 for a hamburger and fries and a Coke at McDonald's, then go ahead, because that's what's going to happen if you use the FTC to force organized labor's agenda. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now I recognize Representative Kelly for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair Bilirakis and Ranking Member Schakowsky for holding this very important hearing. I also want to commend and thank our 3 witnesses for your service at our nation's chief consumer protection agency, as well as your staff. Last Congress, when the FTC testified before the committee, we discussed several challenges the agency was facing, notably the uptick in consumer complaints to the agency about a broad range of pandemic-related marketplace abuses. I found this dialogue particularly concerning because I often heard from constituents, many of them seniors living in my district, about how the pandemic put a squeeze on their finances, as my colleague just talked about. At a time when seniors had so much to worry about, I felt moved to introduce legislation to help stop our vulnerable populations from falling victim to scam callers. That led me to introduce the Protecting Seniors from Emergency Scams Act, which requires your agency to report on and increase awareness regarding scams targeting older adults. Chair Khan, do you think it would be beneficial to consumers if there was a known centralized location to receive current information about scams and contact information for law enforcement and adult protective services agencies?
Thanks, Congresswoman. There's no doubt that whenever you make it easier for consumers to access that type of information, that's a net benefit to consumers, but also to us from an enforcement perspective.
Thank you for your response. I find these scams troubling and looking forward to reintroducing this bill, this Congress, so the House may once again pass it out of the chamber. Now I would like to shift focus to another FTC-related bill that I introduced last Congress, the Consumer Equity Protection Act, which would establish a federal task force to advise the FTC on issues of equity impacting consumers of protected classes. This bill is important because we know that many times folks are targeted based on their identity as a member of a certain protected class, like age, race, religion, sexual orientation, or disability, which I can relate to now. Chair Khan, I'm aware that over the years, the FTC has released a few reports, notably the Serving Communities of Color and Combating Fraud in African American and Latino Community reports that detail fraud and consumer issues that have a disproportionate negative impact on communities of color. And last Congress, when you and then Commissioner Chopra testified, you all acknowledge the method of discrimination has become more sophisticated and subtle as technological tools are enabling discrimination and targeting of individuals belonging to protected classes. So given this growing threat, how would creating a task force help the FTC to protect minorities from fraud and abuse?
This is absolutely a big area of concern. One thing that we do as part of our Every Community initiative is actually do some data analysis to see what are the consumer complaints coming in and are those mapping onto a greater abuse or greater fraud being targeted at particular communities, and we absolutely see that those trends continue. We've been able to pursue enforcement actions in this area. Last year, we brought our action involving Passport, this auto dealer that had been charging higher fees to Black consumers, to Latino consumers, and raising costs for them, as well as attaching all sorts of junk fees. So we're taking enforcement actions in this area, as well as continuing to identify trends. You're absolutely right that the growing digitization of our economy is creating all sorts of additional covert ways that companies can be engaging in discrimination. As we bring on additional expertise, including technologists, this is an additional area that we're hoping to dig more into.
So it's funny you brought up the Passport auto case, because I was going to ask you about that and what you intend to do to further emphasize this application of unfairness doctrine and why this is important.
Yeah, absolutely. In this case, we saw that there was substantial injury stemming from the fact that Black and Latino consumers were being charged more fees than their white counterparts, and that this was not reasonably avoidable, and that there were no countervailing benefits to this discrimination. So we thought it was important to put the market on notice that we view this as an unfair practice, and this is absolutely an area that we're going to continue to be looking at.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, appreciate that. And now I'll recognize the Vice Chairman of the Subcommittee, Mr. Wahlberg, from the great state of Michigan, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the commission members for being here. And appreciate some of your updates on some of the successes you had. I think successes, to some degree, we could agree with. Commissioner Khan, you and I talked about child online data security and my concerns with that, and appreciate efforts there, consumer subscription cancellations and concerns that are there, and other things. We certainly would expect you to give us some wins. But here in the committee, we're going to be talking about what we think are losses and some concerns that we received not only from businesses and consumers, but even from staff, former staff members and commissioners of the FTC. So with that acknowledgement of the filter that we have, I want to ask some pointed questions. Chairwoman Khan, I want to follow up on some things that Chair Rogers referenced earlier regarding your decision to strike those words in the FTC's mission statement, namely without unduly burdening legitimate business activity. The message that I believe that sent to an already challenged American private sector struggling to rebound from COVID-19 shutdowns was quite simply, and these would be my words, consider yourself guilty of accusations from the FTC unless you can prove otherwise. That's a concern. If that isn't a reality, it's still an assumption that many could make. Legitimate businesses shouldn't have to worry about receiving a letter from the FTC warning them of significant fines because you are not properly dedicating resources to go after a specific bad actor. On multiple occasions now, the FTC has sent in bulk over 700 letters to companies, including just last week, putting them into the interrogation spotlight as they perceive and potentially intimidating them into submission. Now, I don't think this is the best way to protect consumers, and it may have even caused more harm than good. Some could even say it's becoming evident that the present mission statement is not to protect consumers, but rather to advance a radical, woke, progressive Biden administration scheme to make every sector in our economy and to punish the private sector when the law does not allow for such punishment you have used process to make legal activity difficult to achieve and a means of punishment. Not surprisingly, this bulk mail approach to the private sector has now led to scammers making the most of the FTC's new unorthodox practice. Last week, the FTC tweeted out a warning to be on lookout from fake letters from Sam Levine, director of the FTC's Bureau of Consumer Protection, threatening to take action against them. One should wonder, was this threat to America's private sector created by the Commission's own actions? And so, Chair Khan, this apparent attempt to become the national overlord has caused more harm than good. Do you plan to extend or end these actions?
Congressman, first of all, I'll just say on our strategic plan, that phrase that you mentioned remains in our strategic plan. It was really a question of the mission statement. What is the term, what is the statement that best represents the essence of what the FTC does? There was a really terrific cross-agency working group made up of staff that really spent a lot of time thinking about that question and determined that we really wanted to focus on who are the communities that we're focused on protecting, what are the legal authorities we're enforcing. On this second issue, section of 5M1B of the FTC Act gives us the authority to put companies on notice when there's a particular practice that the FTC has determined is unlawful and issued a cease and desist order. So by many measures, to my mind, this is a good government practice, but because we're putting market participants on notice.
But if I could jump in here and
illegal
say the fact that the aggressive approach has not been effective to the point that you have not won on a number of those cases, and that's one of the biggest concerns that we address. As you've perceived, this is your purpose, yet underlying it are failures at that level. Let's.
Congressman, respectfully, we haven't actually lost any litigations relating to our notice of penalty offense authority.
But many losses because of the perception of the aggressive nature that you've taken that's been outside of what your purpose is, and especially when you attempted to take that phrase out of your mission statement. I wish we could go on, but I see my time has ended, so I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll recognize Representative Castor from the great state of Florida for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our FTC commissioners for being here today. Members, it is urgent that the Congress pass a comprehensive data privacy law that protects the personal privacy of Americans, especially our kids. Luckily, we have a bipartisan bill to do just that, the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, and I urge Chair Rogers and Ranking Member Pallone to introduce and mark up the ADPPA as soon as possible. Congress is late to the game here. Other countries have acted. We're behind. But fortunately, the FTC has used its powers to protect Americans from unfair trade practices in this area. But I'm particularly concerned about the impact on children, and I know you are too, based upon what you've done. For many years, I've called attention to the ways in which big tech platforms are surveilling, tracking, and collecting our most private information in pursuit of profits. This is especially concerning for children. I've raised the alarm again and again about how these surveillance practices harm kids and teens, and how big tech platforms use the manipulative design to addict kids to their products and funnel them towards harmful content. That's why I'm planning on reintroducing the Kids Privacy Act to ensure tech platforms build in privacy and safety in kid-directed products during their design. The FTC is also working to protect children online, and thank you for that. But you need to do more. Chair Khan, could you please give us an update on the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act rule review and the 6B investigations the FTC is conducting into social media and video streaming services?
Thanks, Congressman, and thanks for your leadership on this issue. So both of these are currently ongoing. When we initiated the rule review, we ended up getting over 170,000 comments as part of our public record. So our staff has been diligently reviewing those comments and identifying what potential revisions to the rule could look like. Of course, that hasn't stopped us from continuing to enforce COPPA, and we've been really thrilled to be able to see strong enforcement actions on that front. In terms of the 6B, that work also continues. As you know, these orders went out to several large companies that have significant resources to try to thwart the FTC from getting the information that we need. So we've been engaged in various back and forth there, but hope we'll be able to show progress publicly in short order.
And last year, the FTC published a policy statement on education, technology, and COPPA. The statement described how the Commission intends to scrutinize compliance with the full breadth of the substantive prohibitions and requirements of the COPPA rule and statutory language. I'm very heartened by this approach. The statement specifically discusses COPPA's prohibition against mandatory collection, use prohibitions, retention prohibitions, and security requirements. Chair Khan, please discuss how those prohibitions currently in COPPA are informing the Commission's strategy and enforcement action.
Yeah, this policy statement really laid out what are the key provisions of COPPA that go beyond the notice and consent framework and actually identify substantive limitations on what companies can do. And so that includes, as you mentioned, what they can do in terms of retention, what they can do in terms of collecting data in the first place. One of the things that the policy statement highlighted was Section 312.7 of COPPA, which basically says that covered companies cannot condition access to their technologies on people having to surrender to endless data collection. And we thought that especially in an era where kids are having to do their homework online, right, during the pandemic, that it was especially important for ed tech providers to be on notice about that. So these are all provisions that we're fully committed to enforcing.
Thank you very much. And Commissioner Slaughter, you've also been active in this area. What do you have to add on this, on the COPPA rule?
Well, thank you. I think of these issues not just as an FTC commissioner, but as a parent of 4 young kids who, candidly, are probably responsible for the fact that I am sick today. And I think I see how hard I, as a parent, struggle, and my kids struggle with managing their interactions with technology. So I think it is really important. COPPA was a groundbreaking, revolutionary statute when it was passed, but as you yourself have noted, its primary provisions, which are putting parents in the driver's seat and operating on a notice and consent framework, are pretty outdated when it comes to today's economy. So we really are grateful for the work that you and your colleagues are doing to update this really important law and make sure it's fit for purpose in the 21st century.
Thank you. It's overdue, and I look forward to action by this committee and the Congress. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I will recognize Mr. Duncan from the great state of South Carolina. Thank you. You're recognized for 5 minutes of questioning, sir.
Thank you, Chair Khan. I wrote a letter last month urging Secretary Raimondo and Ambassador Tyler to deter foreign governments from pursuing policies or actions that target U.S. businesses in industries where the United States is a global leader. I ask unanimous consent to put that letter in the record. The EU Digital Marketing Act is designed to harm U.S. tech companies and ultimately help Chinese companies take their place within the European market. The EU has done a terrible job overregulating their own companies into oblivion, and now they seek to harm the U.S. companies who had filled that void to the benefit of Chinese market entrants. This is a March 30th, 2023 press release from the FTC, which seems to brag about the Commission's cooperation with the European Union's implementation of the deeply problematic DMA. I ask unanimous consent to enter that in the record.
Yes, without objection. So
We cannot allow foreign jurisdictions to harm U.S. companies under the guise of competition policy. But in an interview you gave back in 2021, you stated, I think it's no doubt the U.S. has been behind the curve, especially with regards to the European Commission. And you noted that you were in close touch with both folks at the CMA and European Commission on competition matters. Chair Khan, under what legal authority do you send staff to implement the DMA, which is not antitrust law from the U.S., but regulations targeting U.S. companies?
Congressman, I'm proud of the international cooperation that the FTC has long pursued under many, many chairs far preceding me. This has been a core part of the FTC's work to make sure that we are able to share with other jurisdictions the work that we're doing and also able to understand the different paths that other jurisdictions are taking.
I get that.
That type of information
You've also
makes us
sought to
all-
undermine U.S. companies in the current negotiating round of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. The IPEF has used the USMCA as the basis of negotiations. Yes or no? Chair Khan, did you and Jonathan Cantor of the Department of Justice send a letter to Ambassador Tai objecting to the competition chapter and the digital trade chapter and demand a seat at the negotiating table for future rounds?
We have been engaged with USTR about that agreement. We've all
Did y'all
seen
send
how
a
these
letter?
Yes, we've all
Can I
seen
get a
how
copy of that, please?
happy to engage with your staff to see what we can share with you.
Thank you. Your actions from the EU DMA to the IPEF negotiations really run contrary to U.S. interest. Were these actions clear by the State Department, Department of Commerce, the NSC, or the NEC?
As you know, there are extensive interagency processes in place, and we work through them as appropriate.
Wow. Why should we increase your budget while you're sending staff to Europe to harm U.S. companies and directly benefit China? You don't have to answer that, but why would you help the EU undermine U.S. law and U.S. companies?
Congressman, details back and forth from our agency to other agencies, from other agencies to our agencies, have long been a key FTC practice extending back decades, and we've been pleased to continue that tradition.
Is it appropriate for you, the head of the FTC, to lobby foreign agencies to block transactions when U.S. companies are purchasing other companies overseas, especially when these reviews are happening without the oversight of the U.S. federal court?
Congressman, we make our own independent judgments with regards to our own enforcement authorities. We have some information sharing agreements in place with other jurisdictions, but as it concerns our enforcement actions, we use our independent judgment and look at the facts as applied, look at the law as applied to the facts before us.
Well, these policies are problematic, and I think what it's going to do is hurt U.S. companies from operating in Europe, from consolidating operations, and it will be to the benefit of Chinese companies, such as Alibaba, could enter European markets when Amazon or companies like that are kicked out. So, Chair Khan, will you assure me the FTC will not urge Europe, UK, China, or other foreign jurisdictions to block transactions or encourage those jurisdictions to extract any remedies for competition from U.S. companies?
Congressman, again, we make our own independent assessments with regards to how the U.S. law applies to the facts before us. We have some information sharing agreements in place, but every jurisdiction makes its own determinations using its independent judgment.
So you're not cooperating with the Europeans on blocking U.S. companies operating in Europe through the DMA or the CMA with regard to the UK?
Again, we have information sharing agreements in place, but each jurisdiction has to follow the laws of that country, and that's what each country.
With the encouragement of the U.S. or the disapproval of the U.S.?
Again, you know, there are many examples in which these jurisdictions are coming to different examples. I think it's good government for us to be sharing information and cooperating to get to consistent outcomes where possible. And again, these types of international processes have been in place at the FTC for a long time. We have a stellar Office of International Affairs that is widely respected around the world, in part because of the leadership that we have been able to show both on the antitrust front as well as consumer protection.
Thank you, and I look forward to you delivering that letter. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Now we'll recognize Representative Blunt Rochester for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to the witnesses for joining us today, and especially for your service to our country. The work the FTC undertakes is some of the most impactful on the everyday lives of Americans and affects the economic health of our entire country. Chair Khan, your bipartisan confirmation demonstrated that Americans on both sides of the aisle are concerned about our personal data, harmed by widespread fraud and scams, and ultimately concerned about the power large corporations have over our everyday lives. So again, thank you for your willingness to testify before the committee. Chair Khan, for years, companies like GoodRx and BetterHelp deceptively shared private health information with social media companies so that they could make more money from users' health ailments, even information about users' mental health. These companies broke their public promises to keep the data private. The FTC rightly took enforcement actions on these two companies for breaking the law. My question is, the allegations against BetterHelp note that these practices continued from 2013 until 2020. Chair Khan, can you explain how companies are able to hide their deception for so long, and how the FTC was able to pursue enforcement in this case?
Thanks, Congressman. Yeah, we were really thrilled to be able to move forward with enforcement on both of those areas, especially since we saw how during the pandemic, a lot more health services switched online and people became much more reliant on these apps to be able to access key health services, be it counseling services, therapy services. You're absolutely right that oftentimes the inner workings of these companies can be somewhat of a black box to us, especially in digital markets. And we were really thrilled and proud of the FTC's work to uncover these practices that had been going on for so long. Again, we have our lawyers looking at this. We have our technologists increasingly on board that are also trying to unpack what's happening there.
Thank you. I'll note that the FTC under your leadership has taken a balanced approach to regulating this new emerging healthcare mobile app industry. In addition to taking punitive actions, the FTC has also updated the business guidance for health data. Does updating this guidance suggest that GoodRx and BetterHelp are not outliers? And should Congress be taking more concerted action to protect Americans' health information?
Absolutely. As you know, Americans' health information is some of the most sensitive data that there is. People feel extremely exposed when this information is out there and misused, and so I think this is an especially critical area where we need action.
Chair Khan, I think Americans will be pleased and encouraged to learn about your proposed click-to-cancel rule. My colleagues, like Ms. Clark of New York, have been pushing to make it easier for Americans to cancel subscriptions. But as you noted, businesses often trick consumers into these subscriptions and then make it extremely difficult to get out of them. While you are taking important action to remedy these predatory practices, I want to ask you about preventative measures. As you know, I intend to reintroduce the Detour Act, which aims to crack down on deceptive practices that undermine the ability for Americans to make informed choices, practices also known as dark patterns. How pervasive of a problem are dark patterns, and what kind of impact do they have on American families?
Based on our work, including a deep study that the FTC staff did that was published last year, dark patterns can be quite extensive across the economy and across digital markets. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that in practice, these dark patterns can end up tricking consumers into signing up for services that they didn't want, into leading them to situations where they're incurring fees for charges or services that they don't want. And so I think we see a lot of deception that can stem from these types of dark patterns.
And do you support legislation that bans the use of intentionally manipulative design techniques that trick users into giving up their personal information? I will ask all of the commissioners.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
At this point, I cannot believe I am actually ahead of schedule. I've got more questions, but I will put them for the record. But again, thank you so much for your service, especially now. We know that so many Americans have been tricked just looking at an app or a website, and they can't even find the little X to cancel out because it is deceptively the same color as the ad or the page. And so again, your work to protect us from abuse, scams, fraud, we really appreciate it. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady, appreciate it. She yields back, and now we'll recognize Dr. Dunn from Florida. We're really well represented on this committee from this great state of Florida. We appreciate that. So I'll recognize you for five minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chair Khan, thank you for appearing before this panel today. Congressional oversight of the FTC is an important part of the American political process. Small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone in rural communities throughout America, including Florida's 2nd Congressional District. These include regional and local grocery stores and convenience stores, which are typically the only source of essential groceries and other consumer goods in many small towns in my district. Last year, as our nation faced broken supply chains and rising prices, I sent a letter to the FTC asking the Commission to use its existing authority to study conduct that could violate laws under its purview. My primary concern is when rural stores are taken advantage of in such unstable times. Many towns and small rural communities have become food deserts after their local grocery stores went out of business. In addition, many of these businesses are family-owned and provide the only viable option for individuals who don't have access to adequate transportation to travel to larger chain stores, which may be hours away. The independent, small, and medium-sized grocers are telling me that big box stores are forcing them out of business. So Chair and Con, Section 6B of the FTC Act empowers the FTC to require companies to respond to questions about business practices. Where are you currently in the 6B process on independent grocers and food supply chains? And have you formally inquired about monopolistic practices harming independent and regional grocers?
Thanks for that question, Congressman. I couldn't agree more that these are especially troubling concerns that we're hearing from independent retailers, especially independent grocers. One 6B that we launched early in my tenure was to understand whether the supply chain disruptions that we had seen were being exacerbated by asymmetries of power that we may see between the small independent stores and the big chain stores. We had
So my question was, though, have you actually formally started that 6B
Yes.
process for inquiry?
Yes, we have.
Excellent, excellent. So last Congress, the then-ranking members Rogers and Bilirakis sent a letter to Secretary of Commerce Raimondo, we mentioned that earlier today, requesting that the Secretary work with stakeholders across the federal government to prevent supply chain disruptions throughout America, especially in rural areas. And have you been working with the Department of Commerce on that particular effort?
I'm not sure if we're working with them on this specific issue, but generally we try to take a whole of government approach to these issues in general.
All right, then. So I'd like to recognize and actually commend the Commission's bipartisan May 2021 report called Nix the Fix. It was an FTC report to Congress regarding restrictions on repairs on various products. The vote was 4-0 on that ruling in 2021. This congressionally directed report highlighted the unsustainable rising cost of vehicle maintenance and repair, and it prompted the need for a bill, my bill, H.R. 906, the Repair Act, which seeks to restore consumer choice and competition in the vehicle repair sector. The Nixing the Fix report highlights the important ways in which bipartisanship at the FTC can result in positive legislative actions afterwards. So after all, Congress did create the FTC, and we're glad that upon passage of that bill, vehicle owners will be able to repair their own property, and repair shops can continue operating without fear of being put out of business. Unfortunately, bipartisanship does not seem to be the order of the day currently at the FTC. Ms. Khan, I find it striking that the FTC Commission or the Commissioner Christine Wilson resigned in protest of your partisan conduct as chair. Chairman Bilirakis, I'd like to submit this February 14, 2023 Wall Street Journal article, Why I Am Resigning as an FTC Commissioner, for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much. Chair Khan, Commissioner Wilson's scathing review of your agency cited, first, your violation of due process, given your failure to recuse yourself from a meta-acquisition case despite clear legal precedent requiring you to do so. Second, your colleagues' and staff's excessive redactions to her written objections and dissent in your ruling in order to protect you. And third, that a staggering 49%, less than half of the FTC employees recently polled, believe that senior FTC agency officials maintain high standards of honesty and integrity. For comparison, in 2020, just prior to your appointment, 87% thought FTC officials had high honesty and integrity standards. Do you have an answer to that question, Chair Khan?
Thanks, Congressman. I'll just say I'm incredibly proud of the FTC staff who day after day are on the front lines of protecting Americans from unlawful business practices. There's no doubt that early in my tenure, there were things we could have done better or differently. But since then, we've been taking these survey results seriously and taking steps to make sure we're fully understanding what was the source of these declines and identifying what changes we can put in place.
My time is expired, and I yield back to the chair, and I'll submit the remainder of my questions.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you, Doctor. Now we'll recognize my friend, again from the state of Florida, Mr. Soto for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. This committee is charged with broad jurisdiction, and overseeing the FTC is one of our great responsibilities. Thank you, Chairwoman and Commissioners, for being here. We've been through a lot together, COVID-19 scams like in Florida, or fake cures, paycheck protection program scams, stimulus check scams, ran abound. I appreciate the FTC's work to rein those in. We faced challenges with social media, and we did have some victories, like a bipartisan robocall reform, which I know everybody around here appreciates. You all testified to your work to combat opioid fraud against our military and others. I find it pretty sad that both Republicans, Wilson and Phillips, both resigned. They took their toys and went home. I guess they couldn't hold on for one more day, right? And now we face major challenges, like restoring the restitution power recently struck down by the courts, combating potential fraud related to the Inflation Reduction Act, a privacy standard that we're hoping this committee could get out and passed. In the meantime, you all have stepped up in that vacuum. We appreciate you doing that. Chair Khan, we saw Grant Bay, a fraudster company from Lake City, Florida, preying on minority small business owners seeking pandemic relief, specifically African-American business owners, with false promises of easy access to guaranteed grant funding. And I commend the Commission for stepping up to shut them down. With new laws now rolling out, like the Inflation Reduction Act, can you speak to FTC's role in preventing future predatory business practices with a lot of the tax credits and other opportunities coming out of both that, the infrastructure law, and other laws coming out?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few ways in which our work intersects with some of this new legislation. One is making sure that in areas where the government is trying to prioritize Made in USA, that we are protecting the integrity of Made in USA labels. I think all too often we've seen that companies can play fast and loose with that label. They put it on, but actually their products were manufactured elsewhere. In 2021, we finalized a rule that allows us to go after Made in USA fraudsters and get civil penalties. And so that's an area where we will be continuing to do this work. More generally, anytime you have benefits from the government or credit from the government that's going out, there's always a heightened risk of fraud that can attach to that. We saw that during COVID, and I think we have to be vigilant at this moment as well.
And how important is restoring your restitution power to protecting consumers with these future scams?
It's critical. Absent that, we saw billions of dollars basically evaporate that could have gone back into consumers' pockets that we're not able to get back to them.
Commissioner Slaughter, the FTC recently launched a new Office of Technology, which would hire technical staff to inform the Commission's investigations. How would this in-house technical expertise help further the Commission's work in areas like you just worked on with Epic Games and helping protect our children from predators online?
Having a fully staffed Office of Technology is critical to make sure we can keep up with 21st century problems in the markets. It's the kind of expertise we need to really understand the business practices that are most hurting Americans in digital markets. And to be fair, today, almost every market has some sort of a digital element to it. Almost every case we have has some sort of a technological element on it. We have, for a very long time, put economists on every case that we bring, and that is enormously valuable, but the technological expertise is also really valuable. So I want to commend the chair for standing up that office, and I'm really excited for the work it's already producing.
Commissioner Bedoya, we saw the Commission work to help with a consent order for Google Pixel 4's deceptive product claims and Spanish radio ads. If the Commission were provided additional resources, what additional actions could the Commission take to prevent predatory business practices in Espanol?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. I'll point to one recent example that I think gives you a sense of what more could be done. The Commission actually has a great track record for decades providing information in Spanish and English. But recently, as of February, we've been able to start providing advice again to spot frauds, identify them, how to report them in 12 languages in addition to English. When you add English in, we can reach 99% of the American population in in the language they're most comfortable in. And that's a great initiative from the Every Community initiative. And there's more where that came from. And with resources, we could do even more of that work.
Thank you, and my time's expired.
Thank you, appreciate that. Now we'll recognize Representative Allen for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair Bilirakis, for convening this hearing, and thank you to our commissioners for being here today. I want to start immediately with questions, and if you could give quick answers, because I got a lot to get to. Chair Khan, during your nomination confirmation process, you know that you would take a 2-year unpaid leave of absence from your faculty position at Columbia University School of Law. 2 years will have passed in June of this year since you were sworn in on June 15, 2021. Have you asked Columbia University for an extension to your leave of absence?
Not officially, but those discussions are ongoing since I intend to continue to serve in this position.
So you have spoken to administration officials about continuing to serve in the administration?
My term goes until through 2024, and I fully intend to continue serving, yes.
Thank you. Members from rural districts have been tracking the status of American Farm Bureau, John Deere MOU, and other related actions on farmers' repair facilities having access to farm equipment repair data. To date, there's not been any similar industry action or agreement between the automakers and industry partners, repair shops, car rental companies, aftermarket parts manufacturers, distributors. With the FTC's nixing the fix report in 2021 and the administration's interest in repair data access, does FTC have a strategy or plan to address the light-duty vehicle data access able that owners of vehicles and their repair facilities face? And I will ask who would be most able to reply to my question.
I'd be glad to say, Congressman, that the Commission's work under Chair Khan's leadership has been terrific on this. I took a meeting with Commissioner Phillips in Iowa with a group of corn growers and cattlemen, and one of the things they kept on coming back to was, I used to be able to fix my tractor. Now I can't. Now I have to go 3 hours to the special shop. They're not open. They don't answer their phones. And this is a really big issue, and this is something the Commission's taking very seriously and started under bipartisan action under the chair.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. I'm glad you're on that. Chair Khan sent a letter to then Chair Cicilline and Ranking Member Buck on September 28, 2021 about antitrust and the American worker. I seek unanimous consent to have this letter included in the record. Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Towards the end of the letter, Chair Khan explained that legislation clarifying that labor organizing by workers regarding the terms and conditions of their work is outside the scope of the federal antitrust statutes, regardless of whether the worker is classified as an employee, would remove the threat of the antitrust liability resulting from such coordination. Chair Khan went on to say that this clarification would allow for expansion of this concept to the gig economy. Commissioner Bedoya, you recently gave a speech in Utah saying that Congress has made it clear that worker organizations and collective bargaining are violations of antitrust laws. An article detailing your speech also stated you said independent contractors such as those who work at gig economy companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash aren't barred from collectively bargaining under antitrust law. Commissioner Bedoya, how can you definitely assert that under antitrust law, independent contractors have the authority to collectively bargain when your colleague has written to the Judiciary Committee seeking legislative action to clarify this as current law?
Thank you for that question. Let me just state that some of the headlines around that speech don't reflect what was in that speech. I can tell you, however, that I do think if you look at what Senator John Sherman said on the floor of the Senate, 1890, 1889, if you look at what members of Congress said in 1914, if you look at what Fiorello LaGuardia said in the floor of this House in 1932, every single instance they wanted to make clear that if you're a working person, they do not want antitrust law to be used to stop you organizing for better wages, better working conditions, things like that. I read Chair Khan's letter from the letter you just mentioned to be squarely in line with my own beliefs and remarks. Might a clarification in federal law be useful, either through an amendment to the antitrust laws or through something like the PRO Act? I personally think it very much would, and I read that to be in line with what Chair Khan said.
So if I understand what you're saying, what you said, you did not say.
Respectfully, some of the headlines were not from what my remarks said, although I do think there is a strong argument that a lot of people who have been classified or misclassified as independent contractors should benefit from the ability to organize. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Thank you, appreciate it. And now we'll recognize Representative Clark, who's my classmate, I believe. And I'll recognize her for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our commissioners and chairperson for their presence here today and their forthcoming responses to the members' questioning. Chairwoman Khan, as you know, automated critical decision-making processes like algorithms can produce discriminatory outcomes on the basis of race, sex, or other characteristics. I'm encouraged by the steps the Commission has taken toward addressing discriminatory algorithms through both its 6B investigation into social media companies, which I hope will be completed soon, and its ANPRM on commercial surveillance. The American Data Privacy Protection Act, passed by this committee last Congress, would prohibit companies from collecting, processing, or transferring covered data in discriminatory manner and requires algorithmic impact assessments. While this committee continues to work towards passage of a comprehensive privacy bill, can you commit to addressing algorithmic discrimination in your commercial surveillance rulemaking?
Thanks, Congresswoman. As you know, this rulemaking proceeding is underway. We have received thousands of comments that our staff is reviewing now to determine next steps, but it's a big area of interest for all of us, and so we're looking closely to see if we may be able to move forward to address these practices. I think you're absolutely right. Given the digitization across our economy, the ability for firms to be able to algorithmically discriminate is a huge concern.
Thank you. I'm concerned with the ability of new generation AI tools to be used not only to spread misinformation and disinformation online, but to generate new and more sophisticated scams. We've seen recent reports from scammers using ChatGPT to generate phishing attacks and deepfake audio scams. Chair Khan, could you discuss how the FTC is working to combat unfair or deceptive practices that result from advances in new technology? I know the Commission recently formed the Office of Technology, and how will that office work across the agency to ensure the FTC is able to fulfill its mission to adequately protect consumers from unfair, deceptive practices?
Thanks, Congressman. Making sure that we're able to enforce the laws even as underlying technology shift is core to the FTC, and we have a host of tools available to make sure we can do that. I think you're absolutely right that AI presents a whole set of opportunities, but also presents a whole set of risks. And I think we've already seen ways in which it could be used to turbocharge fraud and scams. We've been putting market participants on notice that instances in which AI tools are effectively being designed to deceive people can place them on the hook for FTC action. Our technologists are embedding across our agency's work, both on the consumer protection side and on the competition side, to make sure that we're issue spotting for this, because I think the turbocharging of fraud and scams that could be enabled by these tools is a serious concern.
Commissioner Slaughter and Bedoya, anything to add there?
Well, I think this is an area, throughout the FTC's history, we have had to adapt our enforcement to changing technology. There's a lot of noise around AI right now, and it's important because it is a revolutionary technology in some ways, but our obligation is to do what we've always done, which is apply the tools we have to these changing technologies, make sure that we have the expertise to do that effectively. But to not be scared off by the idea that this is some new revolutionary technology and dig right in on protecting people.
Very well.
Congresswoman, thank you for your leadership on this. Let me add, I'm really proud of how staff in the Division of Privacy Identity Protection and the Division of Advertising Practices have been consistently sending signals to industry that there is law. A lot of folks in industry are saying, this is unregulated, we need to regulate this. Our staff has been consistently saying our unfair and deceptive practices authority applies. Our civil rights laws, fair credit, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, those apply. The other point I'm really glad that they have stressed is it is not okay to say your algorithm is a black box and you don't understand it, so you're not responsible for it. Some of these laws demand explainability. And so I'm proud that the Commission has been staying up to date through the Office of Technology, through the career staff at DPIP and DAP, to make clear that there is law and companies will need to abide by it.
Very well. Thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Gentlelady. Yields back. Now I'll recognize Representative Fulcher for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to those on the panel for being here and contributing today. This is addressed to Chair Khan, please. The proposed motor vehicle dealers trade regulation rule is something that FTC claims will save consumers $31 billion while only imposing $1.4 billion in regulatory costs. The entirety of these savings is based on FTC's claim that consumers will spend 3 fewer hours shopping for a vehicle. And the Commission arrives at that apparently by taking the number of vehicles transacted in 2019, which is about 62.1 million, multiplying that by 3, then multiplying that sum by 2220, which is the value of non-work time hours for the average U.S. worker. That's my understanding where that came from. The 3 hours of savings is based on the Commission's assumption that the proposed rule will save 3 consumer hours. Can I just ask, Ms. Khan, what sources or documentation does the Commission have for making that kind of an assumption?
Congressman, our proposed rule lays out extensive documentation for how we have come up with some of these estimates, and we'd be happy to engage with your team to share.
Why won't those sources, so I understand why you may not be able to recite them here, but why weren't those sources listed in the documentation in the rule, or in the notice of proposed rulemaking, or NPRM? Because it was not.
I know as a general matter, our staff tries to make sure that they're citing whatever empirical evidence underlies their assessments and analysis. Again, happy to engage with your team to see if there's more.
It's my understanding that that was simply not there. That rule also mandates up to 4 new disclosures for car buyers to sign related to add-on products. We all know that takes time, burdening consumers with more government paperwork and so on. Did your assumption factor in your own rule and what that will cost consumers in terms of time in the showroom?
Congressman, our work here is based in part through our enforcement actions, which have shown that unfortunately the car buying experience remains unfriendly to consumers.
So we take that as a no. It did not factor that in. That's what I'm understanding.
Factor what in?
The time that it takes to put your own rule in place, burdening consumers with that paperwork for add-on product disclosures.
When we do this rulemaking, we have to engage in a cost-benefit type of analysis. So those considerations were definitely done here.
Using the Commission's calculation of the value of consumers' non-work time, can you provide an estimate of how much the added paperwork mandated under the proposed rule will cost consumers?
We're happy to be in touch with your team if we can provide any.
These are things that are important when you go about the process of this rulemaking, and that's the point of this discussion here. In a response to a question, for the record, and I think it was to Senator Cruz last year, you made a quote. You said, "For a recent and exceptionally well-done example of an economic analysis that FTC economists played a leading role in formulating, I recommend to you the notice of proposed rulemaking concerning a motor vehicle dealer's trade regulation rule. The billion-dollar-plus regulatory cost of this rule is real." So those are your words. That's my understanding. So is this what passes in the FTC now for exceptionally well-done example of an economic analysis? Analysis based on inflated data and assumption, but not supported by what we can tell any economic data.
Congressman, our economists do superb work. The analysis that they do is undergirded by close assessment of the available empirical evidence, and I have no doubt that that's true here as well.
Ms. Khan, the data doesn't seem to back that up. Section 110 of the FTC's procedural rule states, prior to the commencement of any trade regulation rule proceeding, the Commission must publish in the Federal Register in advance notice of such proposed proceeding. Since the proposed motor vehicle dealers trade regulation rule is a trade regulation rule, why didn't the FTC first issue an announced notice of proposed rulemaking, or ANPRM?
Congressman, this rule was issued pursuant to Dodd-Frank, which is separate from Section 18 of the FTC Act, which does require publication of an ANPR. Pursuant to Dodd-Frank, we're able to do this under the Administrative Procedure Act.
And my understanding is that you still have that requirement regardless of how this is submitted.
My understanding is that this is done under the APA. The APA permits us to begin by publishing a notice of proposed rulemaking.
Ms. Khan, I thank you for your responses, but at the same time, I hope you understand the concern here. I've got a group of car dealers that are very difficult to upset in many ways, but you figured out a way to do that. And so our urging is to make sure that you follow that process moving forward. It's there for a reason. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman. Yields back. And now recognize Representative Dingell for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm biting my tongue because I'm not old, but I'm seasoned, and the auto industry has for many a year not always loved the FTC. But anyway, I'm going to behave. Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Schakowsky, for holding this important hearing, and to all of you for sitting through all of this. The FTC provides a critical service promoting fair competition and protecting consumers from fraud and deceptive business practices to robocalls and exploitative predatory marketing. The FTC's mandate is expansive, and it's continuing to grow with an increasingly diverse and innovative marketplace. This committee is also considering granting the FTC additional specific authorities to regulate big tech and data privacy through comprehensive data privacy legislation. And I want to make this point to all of my colleagues: if we can seriously expect the FTC to enforce these critical protections among its many responsibilities, we are going to have to make sure that you've got adequate funding and staffing to do so. I would like to focus now my questions on some of the crucial efforts that you are currently engaged in to protect consumers. In March, we heard from TikTok's CEO about the company's collection of location data, and it gave me great concern. In the face of that information, I'm very pleased to talk about the FTC's latest geolocation data case against the data broker Kokava. My understanding is that in Kokava, the FTC has alleged that the defendant collected consumers' precise geolocation data, including locations that revealed consumers' visits to reproductive health clinics, houses of worship, temporary shelters for domestic violence survivors, and addiction treatment centers, and then sold that data to third parties, all without the knowledge of the consumers whose data was being collected and sold. I know that this case is in litigation in federal court now, so you're going to be somewhat limited in what you can say, but these are issues that really matter personally to me. And to the victims, I try to help. To those that are trying to get treatment, who are those who are scared that they'll be persecuted for where they're worshiped. So I'd like to ask each of the commissioners, setting aside technical legal standards for unfairness under the FTC Act, do you believe the average consumer would agree it is unfair for a data broker they've never had contact with to sell data about their visits to sensitive locations? Just yes or no. Chairman Khan?
As a general matter, yes, I think most Americans would be quite surprised.
Commissioner Bedoya?
Yes, I'll just add this was a bipartisan case at the Commission.
Commissioner Slaughter?
Yes.
Chairwoman Khan, in this case, is the FTC seeking any financial recovery from the defendants? And if not, explain why not.
Thanks, Congresswoman. So in this case, we are alleging that the practice was unfair under Section 5 of the FTC Act. In light of the Supreme Court's decision in AMG, we are not able in federal court to get back monetary equitable relief, including money back for consumers, under Section 5 where we're in federal court. So unfortunately, we are hampered in that way.
So Commissioner Slaughter, would allowing the FTC to seek civil penalties to help deter this type of conduct and the continued sale of precise geolocation data revealing sensitive information?
Yes, civil penalties play a very important deterrent effect, and we can only activate them either where we have an existing order or where we have an existing rule or where Congress has given us specific authority, and that would make a big difference here.
And for any of the three of you, is there other authority Congress could provide to the FTC that would help enforcement in these type of privacy cases? Chairman Khan.
I think as a general matter, any more specific bright line rules or prohibitions that Congress is able to legislate would certainly make our jobs easier.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly try to do, I'd like to talk about one type of technology that some data brokers use to collect data, software development kits or SDKs. Data brokers that consumers have likely never heard of entice app developers to install these SDKs in their apps, which collect geolocation data and feed it directly to the data brokers, who then resell it to advertisers, other brokers, and anyone else they chose. And even the app developers often don't know where the consumer's data will end up. To all consumer commissioners, yes or no, putting aside the statutory requirements for an unfairness claim, do you think consumers would think this type of data collection is unfair? Yes or no? Just go down there.
Yes.
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 And Chairman Khan, in 4 seconds, do you know any good reason why Apple and Google continue to let app developers use SDKs and applications offered on their mobile application platforms? Do SDKs warrant significant concern?
I think they've warranted scrutiny, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. People don't understand what's happening. I went in to do my financial disclosure this week and went in to look up the value of something. And within 2 minutes of my having done that, I was getting investment advice. Which people don't know how we're being traced. Had to make that point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you. Gentlelady yields back, and now I'll recognize Representative Harshberger for 5 minutes of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you all for looking at the unfair and deceptive business practices of pharmacy benefit managers. And I know that study was initiated a year ago, but I hope you look at vertical integration and how that is really making it impossible for small independent businesses to survive. And with that being said, Chair Khan, I'd like to discuss the gig economy. Specifically, I'd like to discuss the FTC's policy statement related to gig work, which was rammed through on a 3-2 vote. The policy statement complains about a power imbalance between gig companies and workers, which may leave gig workers exposed to harms from unfair, deceptive, and anti-competitive practices, and is likely to amplify such harms when they occur. Chair Khan, just a mere power imbalance in a commercial distribution chain does not violate American antitrust or consumer protection law unless it's accompanied by a specific bad conduct which harms consumers. Chair Khan, you have a specific amount of legal authority that Congress has authorized, and it does not include addressing power imbalances. Why are you deviating? In a short answer, why are you deviating from your authorized role?
Thanks, Congressman. We're actually following existing precedent, including work that was started under my Republican predecessor, Joe Simons, to address instances in which gig companies are engaging in illegal business practices, including with regards to their workers. One of the enforcement actions that preceded my time at the Commission involved instances in which Amazon was deceptively withholding tips from gig workers, from its drivers. So again, there's nothing really unusual about this work.
Okay, that's good enough for me. But there's another interesting component of the policy statement, and it's around gig workers. It seems natural to me to call these people workers, not consumers, because generally in a lot of gig, if you look at Lyft or Uber drivers, for example, they're contract workers or 1099s. They can leave anytime they want. But the FTC seems to have invented a new term called working consumers. Am I getting the phrase right? Yes or no? Working consumers?
I'm not specifically familiar with that phrase. I will say our statute prohibits unfair or deceptive acts or practices as they could affect any market participant, be it a consumer, be it a worker, be it a small business.
If it's called working consumers, it's an oxymoron, because the next thing we're going to have are manufacturing consumers, or we're going to have selling consumers. And it's alarming because the FTC seems to think that it can regulate just about anyone if you label them as a consumer. And the wording is especially concerning given the FTC's agreement with the National Labor Relations Board. The Federal Trade Commission does not have authority to promote the unionization of workers. And you can answer this very shortly. How does the FTC NLRB Memorandum of Understanding affect the FTC's review of the gig economy?
So this is an MOU that we're really pleased to be entering because there are ways in which our staff can be exchanging information and sharing information that can allow each agency to better do its job. It's absolutely true that our authorities differ from those of the NLRB, but through having these partnerships, through having training of staff, we can make sure each of us is best positioned to do our job.
Okay, I have two more and I've got a limited amount of time. I will tell you this, I'm troubled by the actions taken by the FTC to unwind the Illumina-Grail merger. And Illumina reacquired Grail in 2021. It's a company which has developed a transformational test to detect cancer. And with a single blood test, that Gallery test can screen asymptomatic patients for more than 50 types of cancer, many of which have no other form of screening and are often caught too late to treat effectively. And I can go on and on about that, but why does the FTC insist on blocking the merger in the name of competition when there are no other companies that are even close to having a test on the market for several years? Why is that?
Congresswoman, I'm limited in what I can say here, given that this case remains pending in our administrative proceeding. I will note that the Commission recently published an opinion stating out our views and our legal analysis as applied to the facts here.
And I do have another comment. We can all agree that competition law is supposed to protect an industry's dominant player. You agree?
Sorry, could you say that again?
I say we can all agree that competition law isn't supposed to protect an industry's dominant player.
Correct.
In light of that, I find it curious that the FTC is taking action to protect Sony, which has 68% of the global market for high-end video gaming consoles, from competition attempted to block Microsoft's proposal or their proposed acquisition of Activision Blizzard King. As you know, Sony's been the most vocal opponent of that deal, and remarkably, the FTC has sided with Sony. Can you explain why that seems to be a good idea?
This case also has been voted out and is in administrative proceedings, so I'll let the complaint speak for itself. I will say as a general matter, we always really benefit from hearing market participants across the board, including big players, but at the end of the day, we always make our own independent judgments based on the law and the facts.
Okay. I know my time is about up, so with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. And right now we'll recognize Representative Trahan for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Schakowsky. It's worth reminding that a strong FTC is good for consumers, it's good for small businesses, certainly good for our economy. You simply cannot be pro-privacy and support a weak FTC. And you can't be pro-competition and support an understaffed commission. The issues before us, whether we're talking about anti-competitive monopolies or online harms, are just too big. And we need federal enforcers like the FTC to have the resources and the personnel necessary to tackle them. Commissioner Bedoya, as you know, an overwhelming majority of my colleagues on both sides on the dais here today support comprehensive privacy protections, particularly for our children. I share Representative Castor's concern about privacy violations in education technology, and I'm encouraged by your answers on improving COPPA enforcement and the COPPA rule. I'm particularly worried that parents and students don't have any choice or control over the technologies that students are required to use. Could you expand on what the FTC is doing to investigate privacy abuses and expand consumer choice in education technology? And what options do parents have if they have concerns about the technology that children are mandated to use in their classrooms?
Thank you for that question. I think one of the great first steps the Commission has taken recently in pushing against precisely this issue is making clear that parents legally have to have a choice. the policy statement made clear that in the rule, it says you can't force kids to surrender their privacy in order to do their homework. So you can't require them to surrender all this information to do their homework. It also reminded people that they needed to give industry, they needed to give parents a choice about deleting that data. And so the first thing is sending very clear signals that there is law here, and for years, COPPA by folks outside of the commission was caricatured as a notice and choice rule when it's not. It's much more than that. Secondly, alongside the rule review, there have been some very aggressive cases brought. The one that comes most to mind is the Chegg case. This involved data that was stored in plain text, weak encryption, that resulted in the breach of 40 million students' data, including information about disability and sexual orientation. And the commission was able to bring a strong case there. And so between the Office of Technology, the policy statement, and enforcement from the Division of Privacy Identity Protection, we're moving on a number of fronts on this.
Thank you, Commissioner Bedoya, and that's the level of attention that our parents and our students frankly deserve. When we talk about harms to privacy and potential digital discrimination, those are what I would call systemic risks. And while it's heartening to see you tackling them in ed tech, we know harms exist across the online economy. Systemic risks are things we can all agree on: illegal activity and content online, digital discrimination, and risks to our democracy and to the health and well-being of consumers. That list includes public security, and the recent leak of classified information by an attention seeker on Discord showed that our country is prone to public security risks inherent in the use of online platforms. Last Congress, I introduced the Digital Services Oversight and Safety Act, which would require the largest tech companies to comprehensively assess and report systemic risks. So, Chair Khan, do you believe that large online platforms adequately assess systemic risks around digital discrimination, illegal content or activity, public security and/or health and well-being of their users? And do you believe a failure to assess these risks could potentially be unfair under Section 5 of the FTC Act?
Thanks for that question. I worry that there is a lot more work here to be done. I think we've all seen time and time again how the business models of these platforms can really incentivize practices that are not aligned with what's best for their users or consumers. And so I definitely think that there's a much more need for us to be looking closely to understand what types of practices are happening, is there discrimination, and how can we be better at targeting those.
And if you were to enforce against companies for failing to properly consider systemic risks, could you accomplish that if there wasn't a standardized way to measure and qualify those risks?
It would certainly be challenging. I'll say in our data security work, we've been able to identify what constitute best practices and then enforce the law based on what should be required for best practices for data security. I imagine we could try to do something here, but of course, a clear word from Congress about how to do that would be most helpful.
Thank you. I understand those challenges, and that's why I've been proposing and much for a national framework like the one outlined in the Digital Services Oversight and Safety Act to assess those risks and those mitigations. Thank you so much for your time. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I'll recognize Representative Armstrong for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The fiscal year 2024 FTC budget request is a substantial increase compared to previous years. The request is for $590 million, which is a $160 million increase from last year's enacted level, and a $213 million increase from the fiscal year 2022 enacted level. The budget explains that the increase is accounted for by adding 310 full-time staff, along with an anticipated 5.2% pay increase for said staff. And there is a single line that briefly mentions inflationary adjustments to account for the 4-decade high inflation data that exceeds 9% comparing 2022 to 2021. And much of the proposed budget is to help the FTC in pursuing your mission in regards to competition enforcement. The Commission's testimony states that the FTC has been reassessing how we can enforce antitrust laws to maximize our efficacy. Considering the Commission's record in competition cases in recent years, we could conclude that the record is neither effective nor efficient. And that may be largely due to the Commission's advancing of novel legal theories as opposed to enforcing conduct that is violative of current law. Former Commissioner Wilson referenced this as defiance of legal precedent. The Commission recently abandoned an effort to prevent Meta from purchasing a fitness startup after losing in district court on an actual potential competition claim, a theory that was entertained by the district court but rejected on the facts. The Commission lost a suit before the ALJ to reverse the acquisition of Grail by Illumina, the first decision since the Commission dropped its support of the 2020 vertical merger guidelines, which acknowledged that vertical mergers generally create efficiencies. Undeterred, the Commission ordered Illumina to divest Grail this month. I fear this may also be the case with Microsoft Activision, but we'll get to that in a second. The motive is clear. The Commission's goal is to advance its novel legal theories. Winning cases seems to be secondary, but you still have to win cases. Referring to the Commission's recent record, former Commissioner Kovacek simply said, ultimately, you need litigated victories. And this perceived budgetary inefficiency and advancement of policy goals isn't limited to litigation. After the last US-EU joint tech compliance dialogue, the Commission announced it would send personnel to assist with the implementation of the Digital Markets Act, an EU-passed law that is in conflict with US competition law. So I'm left to wonder, as someone who co-sponsored a bill to increase merger filing fees to support the Commission's enforcement efforts, why should Congress grant such a substantial budget increase to the Commission? With regards to Sony, and Sony controls about 2/3 of the global gaming market and has vocally opposed Microsoft's acquisition of Activision. The FTC's position aligns with Sony, the dominant market leader, despite Xbox's position as the third place gaming console manufacturer with a near non-existent mobile gaming market share and multiple public comments to ensure that Call of Duty is open to competitor consoles. While the FTC complaint mentions that Microsoft competes with independent studios to offer games like Call of Duty, this is really another challenge of a vertical merger. I previously mentioned the FTC's administration court loss in the Grail Illumina, but the DOJ's failure to block the vertical merger between United Health Change Healthcare is also informative. I understand that the Commission may be limited in what they can say regarding ongoing litigation. Without speaking to the facts of that matter, Chairwoman Khan, do you agree with the statement that antitrust laws exist to protect consumers, not individual competitors?
Thanks, Congressman. We follow the competition laws as written by Congress. The Sherman Act says, restraints of trade or practices that undermine competition are illegal. We also look closely at Section 5 of the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair methods of competition. So we are fully committed to following the text of the statutes.
And you have previously stated that reforming FTC merger policy should be more deeply rooted in the text of our statutes and bringing antitrust more squarely within the rule of law. Yet the FTC now demands decade-long prior approval provisions in consent orders in merger matters. Former Commissioners Phillips and Wilson have called this policy an end run around the Hart-Scott-Rodino pre-merger notification framework that Congress established in 1976. What is the specific statutory text that grant FTC authority you claim?
So these prior approvals are obtained in settlements with parties when we're taking action. I should note that pursuing prior approval was actually long-standing FTC practice through the mid-90s, and so the changes that we've made are actually putting us back into alignment with long-standing FTC practice.
And then I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into a record a letter Senator Kramer sent.
Yeah, without objection, so order.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, and I don't see anyone on the Democrat side, so I'll recognize my good friend from Gainesville, Florida, home of the Fighting Gators, Ms. Kamick. Please, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go Gators. All right. Mr. Chairman, I would like to start out by submitting 2 letters for the record written by FTC alumni expressing concerns about the integrity and fairness of the FTC and its departure from the agency's traditional norms and bounds.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. As I mentioned, these letters are both signed by prominent former officials of the FTC, and I would say that when FTC alumni are questioning the direction and integrity of the FTC, I certainly think that we here in Congress should as well. I would also like the record to reflect that neither of these letters have been responded to by you or your office. Additionally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit the August 1st, 2022 FTC Inspector General's report titled Audit of the Federal Trade Commission's Unpaid Consultant and Expert Programs for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Khan, according to the Inspector General's report, you expanded the agency's use of unpaid consultants and experts, correct?
We made use of government authorities that allow us to bring on experts, yes.
How many consultants were added to the FTC after your confirmation?
I don't have those numbers top of mind, but we're happy to get those to you.
Thank you. Did they receive training?
They received ethics training and ensuring that they were in compliance with all FTC's rules and ethics rules.
Okay, perfect. According to your agency's press statement on the IG's audit, you defended the agency's use of unpaid consultants and experts by claiming that they fill, quote, subject matter gaps. What gaps have existed during your tenure?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I should note that there are existing authorities that allow us to bring on these experts for precisely this function. A lot of our work can get quite technical. It can require deep industry expertise, especially as we're doing our work in digital markets. It can require expertise to understand how these technologies are working, and so we were able to bring on, for example, experts in AI technologies to help us make sure that our work in this area was fully informed by the latest best practices and the latest industry knowledge.
Perfect, thank you. Who did these consultants and experts report to and how frequently?
So it would depend on where they were brought on within the agency. We had some experts that were brought on within the Office of Policy Planning, and so they would report to the director of that office. We had some experts brought on to the Bureau of Consumer Protection, and so they would be reporting to the respective managers there.
And did your staff keep you informed about the work of these consultants and experts that were doing work on behalf of the agency?
Yeah, as a general matter, these consultants were being plugged into existing work streams, and so as that work was coming up to the commission, we would see their contributions there.
So I would like to get copies of the communications from these consultants to you and your office and your staff. Could you provide that to us?
We're happy to work with your team to see what we can make available.
I would hope all of it would be made available. Now, under your helm, how did the agency define consultant and expert specifically? What criteria did the agency use in recruiting these consultants and experts?
As a general matter, when we're looking to bring on experts, we're doing so because there is a specific function for which we need their expertise. And so the criteria would depend on whether we were looking to bring on people who had particular expertise in AI, in particular forms of digital markets, in particular areas of antitrust, where we felt we didn't have the requisite expertise internally and so needed to go outside.
So it doesn't really answer my question of how you define a consultant or an expert, but I guess...
I believe those terms are probably defined under the regulations, so we would follow those definitions.
So you advertise this to members of the public?
As a general matter, we have the authority to identify specific experts that we want to bring on board. There are no requirements. There are no requirements under the regulations.
You did not publicly advertise these unpaid consultant positions to the public?
Correct.
You did not, okay. Why?
We followed the underlying regulations that permit government agencies to bring on outside experts and consultants. Given that the function for which we're doing this is to fill specific niche needs, we thought it would be most efficient to actually identify directly the people we needed. And again, we followed the regulations and what they require.
So you don't publicly advertise these positions for these experts. Who initiates contact?
As a general matter, I would think the agency would have initiated contact since these were specific needs that we were looking to fill, and so we would know what our needs were.
Seems like it's ripe for an opportunity for fraud or corruption or finding people who are willing to execute on a political agenda. But did you receive approval from the FTC's Office of General Counsel ethics team to do this?
Yes, the ethics teams is always involved anytime we bring new people on board at the commission.
And you will be willing to provide the written approval to this committee?
We're happy to provide you whatever materials we have available in this area.
My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chair Khan, for being here.
Gentlelady yields back, and now we'll recognize my good friend from the state of Indiana, Mr. Pence, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis and Ranking Member Schakowsky for holding this hearing, and thank you to the commissioners for being here with us today. As we discussed today, the FTC plays a critical role protecting consumers from fraudulent schemes and deceptive trade practices. You know, years ago, many years ago, I had to get involved in mergers that occurred across the country, and that doesn't seem to be something anybody gets involved in anymore. And the consolidation, especially in big tech, which is something I focus on, has just gone unchecked. But that's not part of what I want to say today. In the past year alone, the FTC has returned over $25 million to Hoosiers that have fallen victim to the deceptive scams and frauds. However, I echo the concerns of my colleagues regarding the direction of the FTC under Chairwoman Khan's leadership. During the chairwoman's tenure, the FTC has routinely overstepped congressionally directed jurisdiction to target American companies. Meanwhile, the chair has disregarded the other commissioners and consolidated authorities of the FTC within her own office. Chairwoman Khan has even gone as far as to allow a former commissioner to vote on a substantial merger policy. In a recent and notable overreach, the FTC issued initial violation notices through their unprecedented penalty offense authority rule to over 700 companies before the final order was issued. Since the Commission does not have authority to issue civil penalties for initial violations for most unfair or deceptive practices, the FTC is setting a new and dangerous precedent that could threaten Hoosier businesses operating in the U.S. economy. This has left businesses in my state in the dark about how they're allowed to do business and continues this administration's find and find approach instead of collaboration and partnership to meet common goals and protect consumers. In 2004, we had the same problem in the state of Indiana, where it was fine and fine, fined and fine, and we got that changed. And of course, the state of Indiana has a fabulously balanced budget, and our economy is growing. The FTC has continued their overreach with a proposed rule seeking to ban non-compete clauses in its partnership with the National Labor Relations Board. This rule rejects American free market ideals and disregards state laws that already serve to protect employees in their communities. I had a conversation just a little while ago with a friend of mine sitting in the back, a surgeon, about what if I went to work for a hospital that paid off my debt? Could I not have a non-compete? That's not my question, okay? As a result of the FTC's concerning overreaches, the remaining Republican commissioners have all resigned. Before this committee considers any sort of additional authority, it's imperative that we gain a better understanding as to how the FTC can more appropriately utilize the resources they have at hand. Chair Khan, former Commissioner Wilson, who resigned just a few weeks ago, brought important private sector experience to the FTC. Can you describe your experience working in the private sector?
Thanks, Congressman. I have not worked in the private sector. I did work for Columbia University, but that's, I believe, organized as a nonprofit.
I'm not downplaying your private your academic experience, but my view of the FTC, which is very positive, back in my business experience all my life, understanding how business actually operates is pretty important. Do you believe the lack of business experience among FTC commissioners inhibits your ability to regulate private sector entities effectively?
Congressman, there's no doubt that diversity of experience among commissioners greatly benefits our work, and I really look forward to new commissioners that the President would nominate and the Senate would confirm, and we'll look forward to
I hope you lead that. I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you.
You're recognized.
Chair Khan, earlier you expressed concerns about data brokers selling sensitive location data, and I share that concern. Anybody who's noticed me testify in just about any hearing my entire time here, I think this is one of the largest conversations we have moving forward. This might be an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because we forget about the true elephant in the room. Do you have any thoughts on the federal government purchasing that same data from third-party data brokers?
It's an interesting question. For us, our work looks at private entities for the most part, and so that's where our area is of attention is. As a general matter, I think it's no coincidence that those who have traditionally been skeptical of concentrations of power, including in government, are now also extending those concerns to the private sector. I think anytime we see, deep concentrations of economic power, that can create concern. And so, be it data collected by, big business or big government, I think a lot of people have concerns about that.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Pence yields back. Now we'll recognize Ms. Lesko from the great state of Arizona. You're recognized for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Khan. My question for you, Chair Khan, is in 2020, 87% of responding FTC employees affirmed that senior leaders maintain high standards of honesty and integrity. That number plummeted to 49% in 2022. This is quite alarming. How do you respond to those that say your leadership style is responsible for such a large drop in employee confidence?
Thanks, Congresswoman. I'm incredibly proud of the staff of the FTC who day in, day out are protecting the interests of the American public. And I take those FEV's results very seriously. After seeing those declines, my team and I sprung into action to make sure we were understanding what was the source of the decline and what changes we could put in place to turn that around.
Who at the FTC has authority to initiate an investigation on a business?
So as a general matter, anytime there is issuance of compulsory process or a CID, that has to go through a particular commissioner.
Do commissioners have to vote to initiate an investigation on a business?
It depends what type of investigation is being done. Traditionally, on the consumer protection side, we had what was known as the Omnibus Authority, which streamlined the ability to send out CIDs to make sure we could do our work more efficiently. More recently, we've also adopted that on the competition side, so in a whole host of areas, be it...
All right, let me ask you more specific. Do commissioners have to vote to seek a court order against a business?
As a general matter, yes.
Okay. Third question. In response to Elon Musk's Twitter acquisition and public commitment to protecting free speech on the social media platform, it appears the FTC began an intense investigation into the company, citing user data privacy as the reason behind it. FTC made over 350 demands of Twitter, including information on journalists that interacted with Twitter, specifically those that produced the Twitter files. On what authority did the FTC make this demand?
Thanks, Congresswoman. As you know, Twitter has long been under FTC scrutiny, extending back a decade when it was found that lax data privacy and security practices had allowed hackers to take over all sorts of accounts, including the account of Fox News. At that point, there was a consent order that was entered into. Last year, we found that Twitter had been violating that consent order, entered into a new one. And in as much as we read public reporting suggesting that third parties may have been granted unauthorized access to Twitter's internal systems and be violating the new consent decree, that's absolutely something that we have an obligation to look at closely.
But I fail to understand how you say it's due to data privacy when you're asking about specific names and communications, and you're specifically asking for the emails and all communications with Elon Musk within the employee network. How does that have to deal with data privacy?
Well, we want to know who is making some of these decisions, what type of responsibility are senior level executives potentially carrying, and so we try to be comprehensive in how we're looking at these issues.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Appreciate it. Now I'll save Representative Carter some time and say he is from the home state of Georgia, home of the national champion Georgia Bulldogs. You're recognized, sir, for...
Twice in a row.
Now you can stick to the
2 years in
subject
a row,
matter.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank
Go
you.
Dogs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to wave on to this committee. Thank you, Chair Khan. Thank commissioners for being here. Appreciate it. Let me preface my remarks by saying this. I became a member of Congress 8 years ago. The first thing I did when I got here was to go straight to the FTC and ask them to look at the vertical integration that exists in the drug pricing chain. I'm a pharmacist. I've been in retail pharmacy. I've practiced over 4 decades. I started when I was 10, so anyway. But seriously, this is something that I've witnessed over the years. And again, 8 years ago, this is the first thing I did when I got to Congress. Go to the FTC, ask you to look at how the insurance company owns the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs, that owns the pharmacy, and in some cases that employs the providers. Finally, last summer, you agreed to do that, and I know you're doing it. I want to thank you for that, because this is what the problem is right here. You've seen it throughout the country. You've seen what's happened in states like Ohio, where the Attorney General just recently referred to PBMs as gangsters. And they are. And they are the reason why the price of prescription drugs are so high. There was a study done a little over a year ago by the Berkeley Group out in California that showed that only 63% of the price of a drug goes to the PBM. Only 37% goes to the drug manufacturer. Now, I'm not trying to take up for drug manufacturers. They need to do a better job too. But tell me what they are doing with that 63%. Do you think that they are passing those savings on to the discounts that they get onto the patient? I can tell you they're not. You're familiar with it, Chairman Khan. I know you are with spread pricing, with DIR fees that are putting retail pharmacies, independent retail pharmacies out of business to the tune of about 4% every year. The most accessible healthcare professionals in America are pharmacists. 95% of all Americans live within 5 miles of a pharmacy. We want everyone, Republicans, Democrats, want the same thing in healthcare. We want accessibility, affordability, and quality. That's what we all want. You do away with that accessibility by doing away with independent retail pharmacies, and you're going to decrease accessibility. And we don't need that. Chair Khan, can you bring me up to date of where the FTC is now? I know you can only say so much publicly, but can you bring me up to date where you're at in this process of looking at this study? I believe that you call it a 6B study?
That's right. And Congressman, early on in my tenure, we started hearing an enormous amount from independent pharmacies about potentially abusive practices by PBMs. We took those reports enormously seriously, and that's why we've launched this study. We've been collecting information, collecting the data that was requested, and are in the process of reviewing it. We're hoping that we'll be able to, share something on that with your office in short order, but this is work that is underway. I couldn't agree more that independent pharmacies play a critical role. One thing that we saw during the pandemic in particular was that states that have legislation protecting their independent pharmacies were actually able to have better outcomes in terms of distribution of key medicines. And so I think we've seen how on key metrics, independent pharmacies are outperforming. And so we need to make sure that unfair methods of competition are not squeezing them out.
I know that you're looking at, I believe it's 6 PBMs total. There are 3 PBMs that control 80% of the market. 80% of the market. That's something. There is no reason. There ought to be a law that a PBM cannot own a pharmacy. You know that there's patient steering going on. When the insurance company owns the PBM that owns the pharmacy, they're steering their patients toward their own pharmacy. We see it every day. That's happening.
I think you're absolutely right that when you have vertical integration coupled with significant industry concentration, the ability for that structure to create conflicts of interest become very, very real, and those conflicts of interest can be a serious concern when they're leading to those types of practices.
I mentioned the lawsuit that was that's recently been filed by the Ohio Attorney General that alleges that PBMs, through their Swiss subsidiaries, collude to fix reimbursement prices and share competitively sensitive information to enable coordinated negotiations. Is the FTC investigating this same conduct?
Congressman, some of that information is non-public, but as a general matter, those issues are on our radar. We also, early on in my tenure, issued a policy statement noting that potentially illegal kickbacks or commercial bribery that might be occurring through the rebate system is on our radar as well.
Well, I'm out of time again. This is the first thing I did 8 years ago. Thank you for doing this. This is extremely important. Republican, Democrat, I never went to the counter and asked a patient, are you Republican or Democrat? All I tried to do was help the patients that all pharmacies are trying to do. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Gentleman yields back, and now we'll recognize, no one on the Democrat side, so we'll go ahead and recognize Dr. Joyce from the state of Pennsylvania. Thank you. Thanks for your patience, sir.
Thank you for yielding, Mr. Chairman. And I would further like to thank both you and Ranking Member for allowing me to waive onto this panel for this important hearing. Chair Khan, last fall, I, along with 67 of my colleagues, sent you a bipartisan letter in support of the FTC franchise role, which highlighted the importance that this role has to the business community at large. And I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Chair Khan, is the RFI announced in March of this year part of the FTC franchise rule review?
No, it's a separate effort.
If this is not part of the FTC franchise rule review, do you agree that there would be benefits of including the RFI as part of the franchise rule review?
It certainly could be. The franchise rule itself, as it stands, covers a narrower set of issues, so we wanted to have this separate process to make sure we were getting a 360 view of what the issues here might be. If we learn things that are relevant for how we should be enforcing the franchise rule or do any amendments, of course, we would take that into account.
And I agree with you. I think that including that as part of the franchise review, including the RFI, would be important. Thank you for acknowledging that. How does the FTC NLRB Memorandum of Understanding affect the FTC's review of franchise issues, particularly at a time when the NLRB is finalizing a rule that will upend the franchise relationship?
As a general matter, we entered into this MOU to make sure that we were able to share information that might be relevant to each other. We each have different authorities. And so if one of us is spotting conduct that we're not able to act on but might be unlawful under their authorities, we can refer that and vice versa. So that's the main way.
I think it's important that you acknowledge, just as you did, that there are different authorities involved here. Do you believe that the Commission has the authority to grant a private right of action to franchisees under the FTC Act?
No, the FTC Act, Section 5, does not have a private right of action.
I think that this is an important message that we take with us, that private right of action is not included. And I would also like to add that the franchise system here in the United States, it's incredibly uniquely American, and it has allowed hundreds of thousands of small businesses to thrive and employ what we estimate are millions of people today in America. We must ensure that this system continues and that the economic growth is not interrupted in a partisan manner or by an anti-business implementation of rules that are outside the intent of the law. Small businesses rely and thrive on that ability to have that integral action of working right here in America. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to waive on, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, and the gentleman yields back. I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the documents included on the staff hearing documents list. Without objection, that will be the order. What I'd like to ask the ranking member if she had any comments. I really appreciate the testimony today and your ability to answer the questions, and appreciate your patience. And I'll yield to the gentlelady, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Schakowsky, for any comments she might have.
I just want to give a big thank you to the chairman and the commissioners for not only being here today, but for all the work that you do to every single day to protect consumers, your efforts to go as far as you can to make sure that all the fraudsters and the people who are trying to hurt our consumers are addressed, and I think you're doing a great job. I want to thank you for answering all the many questions that you had, and for being there every day along with your staff. Thank you.
Appreciate you giving us your time. And members, that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to respond to the questions promptly. Members should submit their questions by the close of business day on May 2nd. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.